can you guarantee those union members that the benefits under Medicare for All will be as good as the benefits that their representatives, their union reps, fought hard to negotiate?
Well, two things. They will be better because Medicare for All is comprehensive. It covers all health care needs. For senior citizens, it will finally include dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses.
But you don't know.
Second of all.
You don't know that,
Second
Bernie.
of all.
We'll come to you in a second,
I do know, and I wrote the damn bill.
And so you have probably the only semi-interesting moment in the Bernie Sanders campaign, this drop the microphone moment about I wrote the damn bill. Still relevant 2 weeks later, and we'll get to why Bernie has upped the ante in some sort of a campaign reboot, and we'll get to that. But before I fully develop the Bernie Sanders angle, I want to come at today's topic from a little different direction. You know, I like to start the show often by sort of taking a big headline in the news and trying to tie it somehow into healthcare. And this week, it's actually pretty easy. If we talk about the in-jail, in-prison suicide of accused pedophile and overall scumbag Jeffrey Epstein. Right, and you all have seen these headlines. You're familiar with it. That despite being in a high-security facility, but despite being on suicide watch, at least at some point, despite all sorts of claims that it's impossible to kill yourself in prison because you can't access the materials, somehow Jeffrey Epstein succeeded in killing himself in the middle of a high-security prison. And isn't this ironic? I mean, if you're the warden of this high-security prison, if there's one guy in the whole place that you needed to protect, that you needed to be sure he didn't hurt himself or kill himself, it's the one man that's getting all the media attention. And you've heard all the details about this, and stuff comes out every day, right? The video cameras were disabled, the ones that were supposed to be watching him constantly in his cell, or they were pointed away from the cell or moved or something. The roommate that he had, that he was supposed to have, was moved hours before he was found dead. The suicide watch was taken off, even though there was no reason to do that. And most recent story that I read a few hours ago was that the guard logs, where they say, yeah, we checked on him at 1 a.m., we checked on him at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., those logs were falsified. So they wrote down on the logs, they actually checked on him, he was okay. It turns out that he didn't. And so, you know, we have all sorts of incompetence and corruption going on here. And, of course, the conspiracy and hitman theories abound, right? If you are a conservative, you're convinced the Clintons did it, you know, and that this all fits in with all the other folks who mysteriously died being associated with the Clintons, Vince Foster, et cetera, et cetera. If you are liberal, you're convinced Trump did it, that Jeffrey Epstein, when he was going to go to trial or cut a plea deal or something like that, was going to name names, and that, of course, Trump was going to be one of those names. And so if you're liberal or you're Democrat, then you're convinced that actually Trump or somebody working on his behalf did it. But at least one thing we can all agree on, hopefully, is that there is definitely incompetence as a part of this suicide, and there is corruption at some level, right? I mean, at the very least, you know, the guards lied about, you know, on paper, on a record, you know, falsified documents saying that they did their job when they really didn't, and apparently they were asleep. You know, if you subscribe to a higher level of corruption, maybe he was killed, or maybe he's not even dead, right? I don't know if you heard that one, that the body taken out of the jail, maybe it wasn't Epstein's body, maybe it was a lookalike, maybe Epstein's been secreted away, maybe he's back on his private island hiding in a bunker somewhere, right? If you really want to take the conspiracy theories all the way out to their edge. But anyhow, at least as a floor, I think we can agree there's definitely incompetence, and there is definitely corruption at some level, at least at a low level compared to the sensational theories about you know, a Clinton hitman or a Trump hitman or something else. And so when you think about healthcare, right? What's this got to do with healthcare? Well, where have we seen this somewhere before? Where have we seen incompetence and corruption that led to the harm of people that you were supposed to protect? And the answer is pretty clear. It's, of course, the VA hospital system. Where else have we seen falsifications of records, right? You know, you write down in a book or on a record-keeping system somewhere that you did something that you actually did not do. And that exists in the VA scandals as well, right? If you think those have gone away under the Trump administration, maybe some of them have gotten a little bit better. But they haven't gone away. There's still issues with whistleblowers getting abused, and there's still issues with folks falsifying records, like this quality measure the VA has. I think that you need to get an appointment within 2 weeks, I think is the number, I'm not sure. 2 weeks of calling to request the appointment. So if there are no appointments available, they just falsify the records, and if you can't have an appointment until the 31st and it's the 1st of the month, they'll just say you got your appointment the 31st and you called on the 21st. And instead of the 1st. So, there's all sorts of, falsifying of records, very similar to what went on in in the prison. And like the prisoners, veterans are prisoners of their own health care, right? They have, in most instances, no other place to go. And although, again, there's been some steps made under the Trump administration to try to give vets other options, those are not getting executed in the trenches. I don't know if you remember a few months ago, Dr. Hall and I had one of his residents on who has a obviously much more recent experience at the VA than either Dr. Hall or myself. But the long and short of that interview with this young lady is that nothing has changed in the VA, and these folks kill themselves trying to get these veterans care and have to operate in a system that offers them, no support whatsoever in many instances. They have to wait on the phone hours, 6 hours sometimes on, I remember her saying, to get veterans with cancer care outside the system if they can't get it inside the system. And, in the trenches, these things die a slow death from benign neglect. And like Jeffrey Epstein, these veterans commit suicide, right? The number is 22 veterans per day commit suicide. Now, I'm not suggesting all of them are related to VA care, but a large proportion of them are. And there's been, many veterans that have killed themselves on VA campuses, right? This past April, we had 2 in the state of Georgia who killed themselves on a VA campus, and one, I think, August 6th, right? A few days ago. 9 days ago, in North Carolina, who killed himself on the campus. And, oftentimes they'll leave notes to the effect that they're killing themselves as sort of the last protest against the lack of care, the lack of empathy, in a system that doesn't really work. And even Trump last March signed an executive order to create a task force to look into veteran suicide. So I see many parallels between what's going on in the prison and how they fail to do their job. How at the VA we have a corrupt system that fails to do its job. And in both cases, you have prisoners of a system who have a suicide rate that is far beyond the general population, even though, they're in a system that should be protecting them. Okay, so let's circle back now that we've sort of developed this example about the prisons and the VA, and let's circle back around to Bernie Sanders, because he has upped the ante. An article in Politico a couple of days ago described, some insider information from Bernie's campaign that they've done a reboot. They've gone back and looked at, number one, his lack of preparation for the first debate, and again, by their own description, a lack of preparation for the first debate, a lack of a message, and then the really neat moment that they had with this, drop the mic moment about I wrote the damn bill, and said, okay, we're going to reboot the campaign. It's going to be all about Medicare for all. Strategically, they're saying we got one strong card. Everything else that we're talking about is just a rerun of 2016. It's not going to capture anyone's imagination. It's not going to separate us from the other Democratic candidates. So we're going to go all in for Medicare for all. So with that in mind, I'm going to replay the clip for you because I want to make a couple of points about this that I think get lost. And so I want you to listen very carefully to it again, and then we're going to kind of pick it apart a little. Here we go.
Can you guarantee those union members that the benefits under Medicare for All will be as good as the benefits that their representatives, their union reps, fought hard to negotiate?
Well, 2 things. They will be better because Medicare for All is comprehensive. It covers all health care needs. For senior citizens, it will finally include dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses.
But you don't know.
Second of all,
You don't know that,
Second
Bernie.
of all,
We'll come to you in a second,
I do know,
Congressman.
and I wrote the damn bill.
Okay, so let's pick this apart very carefully, because Bernie was very, very clever here. You know, Bernie's not dumb. And he knows how to play a shell game when he's in a debate situation. You know, he's finely tuned his, is health care a right argument, and knows how to corner people with that. So he's a very smart guy. So let's look at what he did there. Tim Ryan, who was the presidential candidate who challenged Bernie on Medicare for All. Tim's point was, you don't know how Medicare for All compares with the union health plans that have been negotiated by these labor unions over decades. They're among the sweetest health care plans out there. And this debate took place in, the cradle of union country. So it was a very relevant question. And so what Tim was saying was, you don't understand how Medicare for All compares to these union-based sweetheart deal health plans. It's a valid point. It's a valid point. But Bernie turned it around and made it sound like Tim was accusing him of not knowing what was in Medicare for All. Tim was accusing him of not knowing how Medicare for All compared to another plan. To know how two things compare, you have to know your own plan and you have to know the union plan. It's unlikely that Bernie has every detail of every union plan in the country stored in his head for immediate access to sort of make that comparison. So Tim was right. Bernie doesn't know. But Bernie turned it around and said, well, I know it's in my own plan. I wrote the damn bill. So if you can't win the argument that you're presented with, create another argument and win that one. And he did that all in a couple of sentences. It was very clever. Unfortunately, it leaves a mistaken impression, and it created a, drop the microphone moment. And now, of course, the Sanders campaign is, selling bumper stickers with that and, God knows what else. When I went on the internet to try to find that clip to record, the Sanders campaign has, jazzed that video up and is, doing what their job is, which is to, sort of, capitalize on that moment. So when Tim Ryan said you don't know that, the that he was referring to was the comparison, not the content of Medicare for All itself. However, the point I want to make at the beginning of the next segment is that this I wrote the damn bill comment reveals some things about Bernie and about Medicare for All that are very, very scary, and we will get to those in segment 2. You're listening to the Doctor's Lounge on America's Web Radio. Stay with us.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your health care freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Doctor's Lounge. Dr. Karuchak, your host today. Thanks very much for being with us in the Doctor's Lounge on America's Web Radio. In the first segment, we were getting pretty deep into a couple of different issues. We started with Jeffrey Epstein's untimely death by apparent suicide in a high-security prison, and how could that possibly happen, relating that to, when the government does anything, they're going to screw it up with a combination of incompetence and corruption. We then started another thread talking about Bernie Sanders and Medicare for All, and I think you can see where the relationship's going. And we've played the clip twice already. I'm not going to fill the whole show up by playing the same clip over and over again, but we replayed Bernie Sanders dropped the microphone moment from the second debate when he was challenging Tim Ryan, and he said, "I wrote the damn bill," and we got a bunch of applause. And we've been sort of analyzing the guts of that. And the first thing that we said was that what was the first thing that we? Oh, I know what it was. God, I'm losing my mind here. I wrote the damn bill. That moment was actually a very clever shell game that Bernie Sanders was playing, and that he substituted. Tim Ryan accused him of not understanding the relationship between Medicare for All and some of these really sweet deal labor union-based health plans. That's a valid point, and I don't think Bernie Sanders knows that, but Bernie Sanders turned it around and said, "You're wrong because I know what's in my bill. I wrote the damn bill," and of course you get the applause, and now we have the T-shirts on the bumper stickers and God knows what else from the Bernie Sanders campaign that has rebooted, apparently, his campaign based only on, he's going to be a one-issue candidate from now on. It's going to be Medicare for All because it's really the only, if you'll pardon the pun, trump card that he's got to play. So let's get on to a couple of other points about this "I wrote the damn bill" comment, because I think it's very, very revealing of the arrogance of Bernie Sanders. And don't get me wrong, I like Bernie Sanders as a politician because at least he's honest. He says he's socialist. He says what he means. He means what he says. He makes no effort to, be somebody he's not. He's not like Hillary Clinton and a lot of the Democrat politicians that, go and, imitate the accent of their audience or try to pretend they're somebody they're not or try to, change colors to match their surroundings. Bernie Sanders is who he is, and it doesn't matter who he's talking to or where he's going. And for that, I do respect him at least a little bit. But I think we also have to, call balls and strikes how we see him. And I think we have a big problem here with his ignorance about unforeseen consequences and his arrogance regarding unforeseen consequences. What is telling about that dialogue between Ryan and Bernie was that not only is Bernie not aware of what the union benefits are and what the union health care plans look like, he doesn't care. He has no recognition of the potential for unforeseen consequences. He is enamored with his own intellect. He is enamored with his plan of Medicare for All. He describes it in broad, overly simplistic strokes of the brush. It's comprehensive. It covers all health care needs, right? He used those two descriptors. Comprehensive, covers all health care needs, as if it's very simple to take 330 million Americans and just lump them under one plan and expect by saying something really simple-minded like, yeah, it covers everything. Well, what is everything? Well, I don't know, but whatever it is, we're going to cover it. With no thought about what it's going to cost, who's going to pay for it, how you finance it, and, raising taxes on the 1% is not going to do it, right? If you do the math, you could confiscate all of the wealth and assets of the 1% and still not be able to pay for Medicare for All. So it's just the arrogance of that bothers me. And I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit and introduce something very new. This whole idea of Bernie Sanders and Medicare for All, Bernie even kind of looks like a mad scientist sometimes. His hair's all disheveled. He wears very plain clothes that don't fit very well. And that doesn't make him a bad politician. He could be fully capable of being president with respect to the fit of his clothes. It doesn't matter. Except it does create kind of an image. And I got to thinking, you have a political mad scientist with a monster, Medicare for All. And it reminds me of the Frankenstein story. Now, I know that Halloween is still a couple of months away, and that may sound crazy, but bear with me. I've run this idea past about a half a dozen people that I respect, and they all say it's a great idea. So before you write me off as crazy as Frankenstein, hear me out here and let me walk you through this. Now, I'm not talking about Young Frankenstein, the movie, although that's one of my favorite movies of all time, or any of the, Hollywood renditions of Frankenstein with the flat-top monster and the bolts in his neck and his hands out going, that kind of thing. I'm talking about the original novel written by one Mary Shelley, a couple of 100 years ago. And, you have to go back, and I went back and reread as much of the book as I could get my hands on to be sure I sort of had my literary facts right here before I sort of went off on this tangent. But hear me out. The story begins with a young teenage aged Frankenstein who goes off to university, having studied some science, but mostly alchemists, right? Alchemy, right? This alternate science that comes from many, many moons ago, before a scientific enlightenment. That's who thought they could turn lead into gold and all this kind of stuff. And he reads all of this in his high school years, basically, goes off to university, challenges his professors with his knowledge, and by and large, not totally, but by and large is unimpressed with some of his faculty, not all, and fancies himself to be smarter than they are, or at least more gifted than they are. And so, he really redoubles his interest in alchemy over traditional science, which was now gaining momentum by the time of Frankenstein's character, and becomes obsessed with the reanimation of dead tissue, right? Creating the monster, sewing all the parts together and striking it with lightning and all that kind of stuff. And he becomes very enamored with himself. He becomes very arrogant, out of proportion to even his talent, and he was talented, a very talented character, but really, regards himself as capable of not only reanimating dead tissue, but raising ghosts from the dead and devils from the dead and all this kind of stuff. Fancies that any creature he creates will sort of worship him as a god, as their creator. The way God created man, he's going to create other living things and become sort of a god in his own right. So tremendous levels of arrogance and an obsession with his project. So does this sound familiar? Does this parallel what Bernie Sanders is doing with Medicare for All? An arrogance that says, I don't really care what the rest of the system looks like. I don't really care about history. I don't really care about who this is going to help, who this is going to hurt, or any of the unforeseen consequences. Right? We are just going to wipe the slate clean on health care in America and replace it with a fully government-run program. And it's going to work great because I'm Bernie Sanders and I say it's going to work great. It's going to work great because we're just not going to think it through. We're just going to step off the cliff and do it. And like the teenage Dr. Frankenstein, he has no recognition of unintended consequences or that anything can go wrong. Well, then what happens? Well, it's interesting to actually read these chapters from the original Mary Shelley novel, because the moment the creature is created, and I mean before the creature has a chance, the monster, that's really called the monster, has a chance to do anything, hurt anyone, do anything, Frankenstein is horrified by his monster. The minute he opens his eyes, he takes a deep breath, and he moves his limbs, twitches something on the table there. And the minute that happens, he's disgusted, he's horrified, he's in that, has that, what have I done kind of moment. Now, there's something odd there because the creature, the monster hadn't done anything yet. I mean, that's like being horrified by your child the minute it's born just because, it takes a breath and moves a limb. It doesn't make any sense unless there's something deeper going on here. And sure enough, bad things happen once this monster is created, right? The monster goes out and murders Victor Frankenstein's brother, leads to the death of two other people, one other victim that Frankenstein murders and another person who's mistakenly convicted for one of the Frankenstein murders. And so it goes. The monster eventually confronts Victor Frankenstein, and oddly enough speaks very eloquently. Apparently this monster's very educated. He knows French. He's sort of picked up all this in his travels. But then he makes Victor Frankenstein an ultimatum and says, make me a mate or I will destroy you. And Frankenstein initially agrees, but then on this second time around, finally it occurs to this allegedly brilliant person that he better think about unforeseen consequences if he's going to build another one. And says, this one might be even more violent than the first, or the two of them might breed a whole race of monsters because you've created a male, you've created a female, right? I mean, the creation story from the Bible. This is the book of Genesis all over again, except it's the scary way instead of the good way, right? He creates the first monster, which is Adam. Adam asks for a mate, right? The monster asks for a mate. But then Frankenstein has second thoughts, and just about the time he's got all the parts put together, the original Frankenstein monster comes in. Victor decides this isn't such a good idea and destroys the Bride of Frankenstein, right? That's where all those movies came from, and destroys the second monster right in front of the first. And the monster swears to get revenge on Frankenstein, says, I'll be with you on your wedding night. Sure enough, months later, he's married. The monster's there. He kills his wife. And in the end, the monster never actually dies, without dragging out the plot too far. And so the parallels are there. They're unmistakable. So what we're faced with now is the mad scientist Bernie Sanders has his monster on the table. All the parts are sewn together. If he's elected president, lightning strikes the monster and he comes to life. And I think the outcome will be just as the novel Frankenstein predicts, that we think it's great, or some people think it's great, up until the moment it's created. And then the longer time passes after that moment of creation, the worse things get. And I think that's where we're going. If you look at, the prison issue and sort of bring those together, here's the fundamental problem with Medicare for All. The folks who think the VA is great and the folks that think Medicare for All is great fail to recognize a basic point of human nature. We humans, wonderful as we are, we need accountability. We need incentives in order to make things work. The mistake of Medicare for All is the same mistake as the VA, the National Health Service, and the Canadian system, which is the belief that all you need to do is bring patients together, doctors and nurses together, put them in a building with a pile of resources, and the result just happens. And that's not it. That's like the difference between a living creature and a pile of chemicals that represent the same composition as a human. It doesn't work. Life is not just a pile of chemicals that you mix together in a pot and heat it up. There's something more. That's the difference between free market medicine and Medicare for All. Medicare for All is a monster. You're listening to The Doctor's Lounge on America's Web Radio.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Doctor's Lounge. Dr. Mike Karuchak, your host this week. It's good to be with you. Thank you very much for continuing to hang out with us this hour. We were reading some articles. This is sort of like a journal club here, I suppose. And we were reviewing this article that talked about the 6 things that are wrong with hospital medicine. There are really 6 steps that take the hospitalist specialty from potential greatness down to merely a vehicle for financial survival. And that's the opinion of the author of the article, who is himself a hospitalist. So the 6 steps, we started to talk about them in the prior segment. We'll review them again briefly. Step 1, you hire a bunch of young, hungry docs that have student loans to pay off and are ready to work really, really super hard, and then you put them on a relatively fixed salary, and then you give them as many patients to take care of as they can humanly handle. That's step 1. Step 2, the doctors themselves respond by offloading as much of the work as possible to specialists. So, if there's a pneumonia, you get a pulmonologist or an infectious disease. If there's renal failure, you get the nephrologist, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's, if there's sinusitis, they call me, the ENT. So that's step 2, is to add on to the specialist consultants. Step 3 is to start massaging your documentation to make patients look as sick as possible on paper, which leads to where we are now, which is step 4, which is the 4th pillar, which is now where you start gaming with things like observation status versus inpatient status, and if you can use improved documentation to make patients again look as sick as possible on paper, so that your diagnoses change, and so your case mix index changes, and so that is step 4. Step 5 is now where utilization review nurses enter the picture and start looking to get fixed DRG patients out of the hospital as soon as possible. Again, because the fixed DRG, as I understand it, and my understanding is very rudimentary, means you get a fixed payment, which means once you get the money, you want to discharge the patient as soon as possible to reduce the overhead. And then finally, the last step comes completely from without, which is the quality measures that CMS imposes on everyone. And now you've got to do everything that you can to sort of live within these quality measures, even if it, creates frank distortions in the documentation in terms of how well or how sick a patient really is. So 6 steps. And again, why do these steps exist? They exist because hospitals live off of third-party payer payments, and so now, the hospitalists above all. I mean, this article made me feel for these folks. It's not their fault. It's not the hospital's fault. It is the system within which we all must exist. And, we all have to do things similar to this in one way or another. It was just a very interesting article published in Kevin MD. What was this? Last September, actually just ran across it. That is so interesting about that. So there's Journal Club article number 1. And again, the theme of all of these articles I found is how third-party payer distorts every single part of medicine. We talk about, certain things, primary care and information technology, and, we talk about all these things. There's a lot of other nooks and crannies in the system that we don't have time to give a lot of attention to, hospitalists being one of them. And so we'll talk about a few of these. So here's an article on the opioid epidemic. And what you might not know about the opioid epidemic is that in 2016, the CDC, in response to the opioid epidemic, came out with some very draconian guidelines, at least according to this author, about, when you can prescribe opioids, how long you can prescribe opioids, who can prescribe them. I hate that word opioids. They're narcotics, for crying out loud. But what were the rules for prescribing narcotics? And, I'm not exposed to this very much. I give very, very short courses of narcotics after surgery, and I do give less now than I used to. I used to give 30 hydrocodone Tylenol pills. Now I give 20, and if it's a smaller surgery, even 15 or even as little as 12. And I think that's worked out pretty well. I think there's probably a lot fewer of my patients with, half-consumed bottles of Tylenol and hydrocodone sitting in their cabinet, which is a good thing. But I didn't do that in response to any forced guideline. I just did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. But apparently docs and other specialties who, prescribe narcotics under different conditions, were really sort of pushed into doing that. And in March of this year, the CDC received a letter from 300 medical experts, including former drug czars from the prior administration, saying that the 2016 guidelines had become a tool for insurers to deny opioid coverage. Right here comes the third-party distortion, as if these guidelines weren't enough. Now you've got insurers denying opioid coverage, and for doctors to undertreat or even drop patients that they have on narcotics. And as a result, there were a lot of patients really hurting, and they were going into narcotic withdrawal. So now what happens? Well, now doctors get a warning, right? Again, it's always the doctor's fault, that you can't taper opioids, see, look at me, narcotics too soon. And so now you got another set of guidelines that countermand the original set of guidelines. And, in reading the article, some people seem to like this. To me, it's confusing. It's kind of like, okay, what are my legal responsibilities, as a narcotic prescriber? And, once again, third-party interference from government and insurers, at the very least, what it does is it deprives the physician of autonomy. It deprives the physician of the ability to use clinical judgment to know when opioids, listen to me, narcotics are appropriate, and when narcotics aren't appropriate, how much, how often, when, for how long. All that is now, taken away from us, and our ability to make those judgments is bad. And remember, it was regulations that started this whole thing in the first place, right? Doctors just didn't start deciding arbitrarily years ago to start over-prescribing narcotics. This all came down because of, JCAH that accredits hospitals, the pain scale, and, the first lecture that we got, years ago that we weren't giving enough medications to patients for pain. So, this is what happens with third-party interference. First, they pushed us to give too much narcotic. Then they threatened us legally to reduce the amount of narcotics, and now the pendulum's back again saying, oh no, don't taper too soon or you're going to hurt somebody. This is what happens with these rapidly flipping guidelines back and forth, and in the end, we're deprived of our ability to make judgments. If they would just have left us alone, none of this would have happened. Not that narcotic addiction is not a significant problem. It is. It always has been. Now the problem is far worse because of third-party interference with the practice of medicine. That's that. Now let's look at another sort of section of the healthcare system that we haven't really talked about very much at all, which has to do with medical research. Medical research that is largely carried out at our hallowed, revered academic institutions. And this article actually starts off picking on my medical school alma mater, Duke University. So it's, with some sadness that I report this, except to say that it's happening in other places besides Duke, and the article just appropriately says that, Duke is just the latest in a long string of this, but this is the Duke settling a doctored data lawsuit for $112.5 million, so a really, really high price tag. But that there was, a one particular physician researcher that was fudging data, and, fudging data a lot. It seems they had a whistleblower, and they're going to receive a significant amount of the $112 million. But, the data here are a little scary. The study was on the effects of pollutants, air pollution on the lungs in a mouse model, and that Duke had won some 50 NIH grants from, not just the NIH, Environmental Protection Agency, other government agencies, and apparently the data that were in these things were fraudulent data. And, and Duke's not the only one that's got this, fraudulent data problem. The article, says there's other ones. In 2017, Brigham and Women's had to pay the government $10 million because 3 stem cell scientists manipulated and falsified information. Columbia University in New York City had one for $9.5 million. So, it's not just one institution. It's several institutions, and, this article mentions 3, counting Duke. But again, it's a third-party payer problem. It's not exactly the same because it's not insurance, but you have a situation where researchers are dependent on a benefactor for the money, and they end up sort of working in one project and one project only. And if the well runs dry on the validity of that project, then they're in a terrible ethical bind. Because if they just come out and say, you know what, I've been working on this project 5 years, 10 years, and you know what, it's just not panning out. There's nothing here to find. It's a dead end. Their career's over. Because if they lose their NIH grant, they lose their job, as I understand it. And so, what's a PhD researcher to do? You have to start over again in somebody else's lab with no grant and, minimal salary. I mean, it's, we've set up a system here, where, I'm not saying the players aren't at fault, but I'm saying I recognize their ethical dilemma that, you do one project, you rely on grants, you have no other income stream, and if that runs dry, excuse me, then you're in it's a terrible ethical dilemma. These folks are their entire careers based on one scientific hypothesis, one project, and again, we've got a problem where government involvement has distorted things so badly that there's a problem. Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left. Let's talk about wellness programs. All right, here's another sort of nook and cranny that we've never really gone into, but wellness programs. We're talking about workplace wellness programs, right, where your employer offers you financial incentives to exercise more, to eat better, to do all these things. And on the surface, it sounds like a good idea. And in fact, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, had very, very generous incentives. You could apparently put, incentives in place worth up to 30% of the cost of your health insurance, which ended up being, hundreds or even thousands of dollars of benefits from, participating in one of these wellness programs. So this is published in Kaiser Health News, April 16th of last month, and they finally looked at, they had a large study cohort. They used BJ's Wholesale Club, and I guess they've got 160 stores. So they put 20 store outlets on a wellness program, and 140 stores they left as they were without a wellness program. And after 18 months, it turned out, the workers participating in the wellness programs did self-report healthier behavior, but those efforts did not result in any difference in health measures. Blood sugar was no better. The money spent on health care didn't change. Job performance didn't change. Longevity in the position didn't change. And so, we've got another situation where the data show that something that seems like a good idea does not appear to be based on this. Now, there's some shortcomings in the study, and we're running out of time, so we're done. You're listening to the Doctor's Lounge on America's Web Radio.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
Well, good morning, everybody. Joe Gravales back with the Safe Senior Hour. I hope all is well. Remember, we start out our show every time with the advice: elder abuse does not report itself. And that's very important as we talk about abuse situations. Again, the Safe Senior Hour stands for seniors, abuse, and financially exploited, and issues dealing with seniors. And again, we look at abuse in three areas, one being physical abuse, the other being financial abuse, and the third being institutional abuse. Financial abuse is by far the biggest abuse that happens to our seniors. Again, we're such a growing population, it's really significant. Again, if you have any comments or requests that you'd like us to talk about, please email us at safe@americaswebradio.com, and we'll get to them. And again, we've been very fortunate. We have been asked to speak at various locations, both in Georgia and outside of the state and other states. And I know we'll be going to Tennessee, and we're going to South Carolina, and we'll be addressing some of these issues. So if you have any requests or suggestions of how we can help educate seniors and their loved ones on the abuses that are taking place, how to report them, and who they can talk to, please feel free to email us, and we'd love to come listen to your comments. And if things can work out, come and actually
to combat and reduce opioid addiction. So they came up with some sort of methodology that they were creating this program. And the judge said, well, okay, we will fund you for 1 year instead of 30. And so that's how they got, $17 billion divided by 30 is $572 million. So I guess that's how the arithmetic worked out. Of course, Johnson & Johnson is going to appeal that, as you would imagine, but clearly the handwriting is on the wall for the opioid manufacturers. And if you don't believe that, then consider the next.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
You really can't appreciate what someone has gone through until you walk a mile in their shoes. That is why we're bringing...
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio and David's Pick. And as most of you know, or some of you know, maybe nobody knows, but it's called David's Pick because I get to pick who I have and who I have on the show, when we do it, and so forth and so on. And today we have, it's very interesting, and I particularly ask, I went to a meeting where Rick was at, called the Johns Creek Vietnam Veterans Association.
Actually, it's Johns Creek Veterans Association.
Veterans, okay, no Vietnam, just veterans.
Correct.
Okay. Maybe that's why they'll let me sneak back in. My problem with it is that you all meet on Wednesday, and I go to church on Wednesday night at the same time, and we have a very unique church in Johns Creek that does communion on Wednesday night. So I take my weekly break and can't be. I don't. A lot of people say I have a split personality. I just don't have a split body. So
you got the same problem I do. I also have a men's Bible study on Wednesday night. So the Johns Creek Veterans Association meets at Newtown Park from 6 till 8. My Bible study starts at 7, so I normally go in there and do the best I can for about an hour once a month, and then off to Bible study. But hate to miss either one.
yeah,
As that happened last night, as a matter of fact.
it did.
So I got to go to both, but had to run one short and get the other one late. So, but at least I made both of them.
That's good. Anyway, we have Mr. Rick White here.
Colonel retired.
Pardon?
Colonel retired.
Colonel retired. And, you know, I guess we talked about this on the phone, and then Bob Moore and I have talked about it, and Bruce Cowie that wrote the book Vietnam to Western Airlines. And, you know, I'm just very thankful from a personal standpoint that the folks that are serving today are being respected almost back to World War II. Not quite, but certainly more respect than Vietnam veterans. And I want to thank you for your service. I was in the Army during Vietnam, but I didn't serve in Vietnam. And anyway, so what Rick does, and we're going to go through it, we're going to dissect it from every side that we can today, because I find it very, very interesting, is that, well, why don't you just tell us what you do?
And before I do that, David, you just touched on something that's very near and dear to my heart. And you talked about the respect and the gratitude that's being expressed to service members today. And I spent 31 years in the Army, 2 years in the jungle in Vietnam, in the infantry. And so, you know, you and I, we all lived through those times where we were, bad things happened to Vietnam veterans coming back and even trying to apply for jobs and so forth. I personally didn't experience that quite as much because I stayed in the Army. So the reason I'm bringing this up, my son has been in the Army almost 20 years.
Wow.
He's got 10 combat deployments to Iraq and
You all
Afghanistan.
have OD green blood?
Army Rangers, is that what you're... Oh, you mean, I see. Yeah, is he... I didn't push him to go in the military. That's what he wanted to do from the time he was 5 years old.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah, the day he turned 17, he joined the Georgia National Guard as a senior at Chattahoochee High School, and then was selected to go to West Point. So he had 16 months as an enlisted man with the Georgia Guard, and then off to West Point and commissioned. Graduated and commissioned in 2000. Shortly thereafter, of course, 9/11 happened. And so my son, Lieutenant Colonel Graham White, is almost 20 years in service, active duty, and has 10 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, 39 months in combat, leading Army Rangers. wounded very seriously in 2003, and recovered quite well, by the way. And the reason I bring this up is my son and his generation of currently serving servicemen and women give tremendous and almost all credit to Vietnam veterans, because we as Vietnam veterans determined, starting back with Panama and the Gulf War, late 89 and in 91 with the Gulf War, we would not let our service people coming back be treated like we were. So the Vietnam service men and women across this nation, almost not even as a concerted planned effort, but as a conscious effort to make sure that the current serving men and women are given their due respect. And so my son, he will tell anybody that the gratitude and expression they get is due directly to what the Vietnam veterans has done for them and continues to do. And so I just want to say that out to my Vietnam veterans buddies. Thank you for making it where this is people are honored and thanked, and not that they're seeking it, but the gratitude for their service is greatly appreciated.
You know, like I said, I was nothing, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but facts are facts. But the only thing I had was my blue braid, and they knew enough to know that I was infantry, and the other side knew enough. And, you know, we couldn't wear a uniform through the airport,
right.
And we couldn't do anything. And and they would get on you for just a damn haircut.
Well, it's in my opinion that the people, the way the North Vietnamese were seeing all this, as far as I'm concerned, there were more people killed because of the demonstrations and the anti-war movement. There were more people killed, North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, American soldiers, and our allies, because of the war extension, because he gave aid and comfort to the enemy.
Oh, and
so anybody that thinks they were doing great things because of a peace movement, they caused more deaths, in my opinion, because it extended the war. It gave peace. It gave aid and comfort to the enemy, gave them encouragement, gave them a reason to keep fighting, gave them a reason to keep killing, and I don't back down from that. They did a disservice to mankind.
And then there was the bitch. But beyond that,
oh yeah, we'll talk about her.
No. So let's talk about what you do now. I find this fascinating. I think, and sadly, I hope that not only will you be in today, but that you'll come back and be in 2 or 3 more times, that we can continue to push this. Because, quite honestly, I didn't know that it existed.
And it's very young, and there's no reason for that. Don't be embarrassed about not knowing about it. David, the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame was established in 2013. Currently, today across America, as far as we can determine, there's only about 11 states that have a Hall of Fame for their veterans. We heard about one in Arkansas, and we kind of cloned, if you'll use that word, cloned ourselves after Arkansas. North Carolina has now cloned themselves after us. Indiana has a similar and a very good Hall of Fame. So there's kind of spattering across the nation. Currently, I'm working with the state of Oregon, and they may be able to establish one out there, and some other. In I think South Carolina, there's spattering across the nation. But we, when I say we, the gentleman, the other fellow that started this was a guy by the name of Colonel retired Paul Longrear. And Paul and I have known each other since 1966. You may recognize that name because he was one of 14 Americans that survived the Battle of Long Bay in 6 and 7 February 1968. There were 24 Americans, 14 lived. There were 24 Americans, there were 24 Purple Hearts. They were overrun by 16 NVA tanks and hundreds of NVA soldiers. So he was very blessed to even be alive today. So again, I've known him since '66, and he had a feeling that he wanted to start something to honor veterans, and he contacted me in February 2013, and we tried to do the right thing, and so we got approved by the Georgia Secretary of State, also in 2013, and the Georgia Senate in March 2013, and the Georgia House of Representatives in February of 2015. So we're a legal entity. We are not tax supported. This is a 501(c) organization. We would refuse any tax money if it tried to give it. Not that they're looking to give us any tax money, but we totally are independent of the state of Georgia, except they provide us a location for the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is located in the Floyd Veterans Building, which is right across the street from the state capitol. So, if you will, I'll just go right down and kind of tell you about.
I was going to ask your website, and people could go to it while they're listening to you if they wanted to. You want to give that to us?
Sure. The website is www.gmvhof.org. I'll say that again. Website is www.gmvhof.org. Of course, GMVHOF stands for Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. So you can also, I'm totally amenable to people sending me emails or calls and so forth, and my email address is rickwhite4750 @gmail.com. I say again, rickwhite4750 @gmail.com. And we'll hit those again before the program's over, in case people didn't have their pencil and paper ready. So again, we started this in 2013, and the bylaws say, that we incorporated, that we can induct a grand total of 15 veterans per year, living or deceased. And when we say living or deceased, people always, you have to be alive, and I say, no, you can nominate somebody back to the Revolutionary War if you knew of a history of a person like that. Again, we induct 15 a year. Of those 15, 10 are in the Valor category, and the remaining 5 are in a combination of achievement and service. And I'll cover that here in just a moment. When we call it the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, we have to define what a Georgia veteran is. And of course, a veteran is an individual that possesses an honorable discharge and has a DD-214. DD-214 didn't come along until 1947, so World War II veterans, they have a discharge paper, so of course it serves the same purpose.
Got mine in my desk, as a
There
matter
you
of
go.
fact.
It's an important piece of paper. You need to keep your DD-214 always handy. So the Georgia part of it, so again, we've established what a veteran is, and that's Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Coast Guard, anyone in the active and reserve components that served honorably and has a DD-214. That's a veteran. The Georgia part of veteran is one of these three things. The Georgia part is you were either born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived a total of 10 years in the state, cumulatively 10 years, or you raised your right hand and took that solemn oath to defend this country in the state of Georgia. When you joined the military and you were in the state of Georgia, as far as we're concerned, that qualifies you as a Georgia veteran. So again, the three things are either born in the state, or you've lived in the state 10 years total, or you raised your right hand and joined the military in this state. So that qualifies as the Georgia veteran portion.
Well, let me ask. I know we had discussed a little bit of it, and you just mentioned it too. If someone has a family member or a friend or whoever they might know about, how do they send it in to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you would go to that website that we talked about, and again, I'm going to say it again in case people maybe have their paper and pencil ready. Again, www.gmvhof.org. If you go to that website, you can pull down the nomination forms. The nomination form is only 2 pages long. It's basically basic data. So that form would also ask, once you fill that out, it would ask for a couple of things. One, a copy of the DD-214 to prove the fact that you are a veteran. Another thing would be an 8x10 photograph, 2 copies. It can be color, black and white. We prefer of a picture of the veteran in uniform back in the day. If you don't have that, that's okay. but we need a picture, a copy of the same picture. That picture would only be you in it, not a group picture or anything like that. But you could be standing beside a helicopter or a tank or out in the woods or whatever, but it's just you. And hopefully back in the day in uniform. We ask, and then the most important thing, really one of the most important things, is a cover letter. We look for to kind of tell the story of this veteran in the cover letter. And that basically is what the nomination form is. And then on that website, you would see where to mail that to Pine Mountain, Georgia, as our mailing address.
Rick, I'm going to have to stop you here. We got to take a break, and we'll be back with Rick White talking about Georgia Military Hall of Fame. And I love it. We'll be back right after this.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com. The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on America's Web Radio with Rick White from the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And it's a shame that you only take in 15 a year and can't take in 10 or 12 million a year. You know, I personally think that anybody that has strapped on the boots is a hero, is a Hall of Famer, and I said I wouldn't ask, and I don't want to get really political, but at the same token, some of our politicians have no clue, and I cringe at the thought of some of the decisions that have been made by congressmen and women that have never served. They haven't picked up a shovel, much less can you drive? Well, there's the wheelbarrow. We all know that one. I just find it deplorable. I think anybody that serves in Congress and or is a leader should have had service. One of the greatest things that ever happened to me, I was a spoiled brat, and you become unspoiled brat when you get that big drill sergeant. And
David, you mentioned something there, and I totally agree with you. And here's the point I think that veterans get, perhaps that other people don't. When you enter one of our great 5 services, it's all about accomplishing the mission. It's not about your background, anything about you. It's all about accomplishing the mission. So I don't care if I'm in the Navy and the other person's in the Air Force and the other person's in the Army or whatever. We're all coming together to accomplish a mission. It's not like if I win, you lose, you win, that's not it at all. It's
well,
all
there's
about,
one little football game that it's sort of.
Well, yeah, that's friendly, good old brotherly love out there. But really, and I don't see that in politics. It's about if you win, then I'm losing. Even if it's a good idea, if you're for it, I have to be against it because I'm on the other party. I can't get my head wrapped around that. To me, it's all about what's betterment for the country. That said, seems to me, when you have people with a background in the military, it's all about what's the betterment of the fill in the blank, the unit, the nation, your organization, whatever. What's the betterment of that? I see that even in corporate America. The veterans that have served and go into corporate world, they're much more team and focused on accomplishing whatever that mission is, as opposed to me focused. And so I just think it's a good way to get things done, as opposed to just aggravating and mad at each other and arguing about things that what's the best for the country.
Well, what I've seen, and it's certainly different from the 60s, but the military is the biggest fraternity in the world. And whether it's man or woman, sorority, fraternity, exactly. Whatever you want to say, but it's... Yeah. And I was in a situation yesterday, and we're very fortunate, in my opinion, to have an organization called USAA. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like I was in this situation, and the guy said, well, I have USAA insurance, and yeah, right then. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't help but thank him. And
USAA is, I've been with them since I was 19 years old. And a couple of years ago, our house burned down. And let me tell you, I should be a poster child for USAA. They just did, we didn't take advantage or anything like that. Anything other than what we were authorized. They couldn't have been nicer. They didn't question us. They just came in, your house is destroyed. Here's a temporary place for you to live at their expense, a furnished house while they built our house back. On and on and on. They couldn't have been nicer. So, again, it was run by veterans. It is a veterans organization, a veterans insurance company, and they understand taking care of people and taking care of the mission, as opposed to squeezing out every nickel they can, make you justify your existence. I can't say enough good things about USAA.
I couldn't agree with you more. They are, the few times I've had to call on them, just like you said, they have been, no questions asked.
Exactly.
The checks, not just in the mail, the check is there waiting on you almost.
And I would tell you, and I think you'll back me up, if you are a veteran and you don't have USA insurance, and by the way, USA is not paying us to say this, I'm just telling you from my heart.
Yep.
If you are a veteran and you don't have USA insurance, I would encourage you to compare what they do for you and your current insurance if it's not USAA. End of story. I'm just telling you, I've never heard a bad story about USA. Perhaps there's one out there. I just never heard one. I've just never heard one.
We had a situation, my wife had a wreck, and it was the other lady's fault, but both of us had USAA. Mm-hmm. And that'll make them toss the coin right quick, but no, and
they're just nice people.
Oh yeah, they're are
very nice people.
So yes, I totally endorse USAA, and if you're a veteran and don't have it, and you really don't even have to be a veteran. If your father was in the service or a relative is in the service, they'll take you.
Yeah, it's a great organization.
It is. So back to the Hall of Fame. Okay, I put your address in my GPS because I can't get out of the parking lot without that. So I put you, and I get there, I park, and I walk in the door. What's going to hit me?
Oh, okay. So now we're talking about the Floyd Veterans Building.
Yes, sir.
I guess what you're talking about. Yeah. So when you walk in the Floyd Veterans Building, and again, I would encourage the citizens of our state to visit not only the Capitol, but walk across the street to the Floyd Veterans Building, whether you're a veteran or not. Because out in front of the Floyd building, every Georgian that has been killed in action since the Spanish-American War, their names are out there in those plazas. It's a humbling experience. When you see the thousands of names, especially from World War II, Vietnam, Korea, World War I, and the other actions, it's humbling just to see that. And I will tell you, I have, of course, many friends that are on the Vietnam portion. So that's outside the Floyd building. As you walk in the Floyd building, if you'll take an immediate left, you'll see the 31 Georgians that have recipients of the Medal of Honor. We don't ever say win the Medal of Honor. It's not a contest, but the recipient of the Medal of Honor. There's 31 Georgias veterans on that wall. If you continue to walk past them, you will walk into the Hall of Fame, and you'll see those that have been inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. It's actually located on 2 levels, on the plaza level and then the next level up. So you'll see the 100 to date Georgia veterans. David, you mentioned the bylaws putting in only 15 a year. By the way, the nomination is good for 3 years. So once you're nominated, you're re-elected at for 3 years if you're not selected right away. Any individual that is nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame upon request, so let me say this again, any individual that is nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame upon request can receive the, quote, Certificate of Honor. The way we do this, and actually I give credit to my son who's also very active with this organization. He said, Dad, what do we do for the guys and ladies and women and service members that they don't ever get in the Hall of Fame, but they're nominated? And we may get 40, 50, 60 nominations a year, but we can only put in 15. He said, why don't we come up with some way to honor them? And so he designed the Certificate of Honor. It's a beautiful certificate. David, the way we do this, and it's totally up to the family, and I've done this all over the state of Georgia. I've done it in churches. I've done it in birthday parties, 95-year-old birthday parties, family reunions. I've even done it at graveside ceremonies, eulogies, and so forth. And I'd come out in full dress uniform, and every time I wear that uniform, I say this: ladies and gentlemen, I am not wearing this uniform for me. I'm wearing this uniform as a visual sign of respect for this veteran that we are honoring today. It's the best clothes I got, by the way, but it's a visual sign of respect. It's not any focus on me. It's a focus on that veteran. So I really enjoyed doing that. This past summer, I think I did 4 or 5 World War II veterans. One gentleman, his feet were frozen in the Battle of the Bulge, left for dead. A tank crew came by, gave him a hot cup of coffee, revived him, and he came back to the States, finished his degree, and became a very contributing citizen to our country. He did not get in the Hall of Fame, but he was honored by the Certificate of Honor. I had a World War II Navy gentleman that, again, he was just a young 18-year-old kid at the time in World War II in the Pacific Theater. Came back, just became a good citizen, raised his family, never been recognized. He got the Certificate of Honor. We found another World War II gentleman that was a POW at age 18 in Germany, and he actually did get in the Hall of Fame, but no one had ever thanked him. So it's just heartwarming to reach out and find these veterans. I'll tell you, David, most veterans, if you mention the Hall of Fame to them, they say, oh, just like you did a few minutes ago at our break, David, you said, oh, I didn't do anything enough to warrant that. Yeah, you did. The fact you raised your hand, you were basically quoting John 15:13 in the New Testament. Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for a friend. You're saying, I'm willing. When you raise your right hand and take that sacred oath, you're basically saying, I'm willing to lay down my life for my friends, people I don't even know, but people that love this country and people that love freedom in other countries. There's no other organization except the U.S. military that asks you to lay down your life, with the exception maybe police officers. So everybody, as far as I'm concerned, should be nominated, and we can honor them in a manner.
Rick, we're going to have to take another break. We'll be back with Rick White talking about the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and I'm loving this, and at the same token, it wouldn't take a hell of a lot more to have some drops coming out of my eyes. I think back over what you all are doing is super. We'll be back right after this.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
45 years of experience is behind the most trusted name in auto transportation. Passport Transport, the first and finest today. That's why Passport Transport is the preferred auto transport for major auto manufacturers, concours, museums, tours, and collectors, and should be your choice from across the state to across the country. When you have the need, go to PassportTransport.com and enjoy the peace of mind referenced experience will give you. Passport Transport.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening. You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on America's Web Radio, and I love this program. And Rick, as a sergeant, I never gave a colonel an order, but I'm ordering you to come back, and we're going to do some PSAs and start promoting the Veterans Hall of Fame.
Sergeant, order accepted. I will be here at your convenience. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, I just think this is something that we have to know about, and you know what's happening in our government and what's happening in a lot of places. Our history is so important, and if there's any, I think I even mentioned this at JC that night. If you want to drive me nuts, just say rewrite history, and that will send me into whatever. You can't rewrite history. History is history, and I want to get into that. I want to go ahead with the Hall of Fame, but at some point too, sort of circle back on the JC and their Vietnam Wall that they bring out, if you don't mind.
In fact, yeah, we can talk about that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, David, the Johns Creek Veterans Association has been very active, and when we say Johns Creek, that doesn't mean you're a veteran and you don't live in Johns Creek. That has nothing to do with it. You can, the law, you're a veteran, you can belong to it, doesn't matter where you're from. But the wall that heals, the half-size replica of the Vietnam Wall, it's a traveling wall, and it visited by coordination back in April of 2017, came to Johns Creek, and we had, I think, 13,000 in a 4-day period, 13,000 visitors to that wall. There's many heartwarming stories. There was one case of and it was 24/7 open. Lights were on the wall and so forth. People were coming out there at 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was just tremendous. There was a lady, probably in her late 60s or 70s, with a young man in his 40s, I guess, and she was there, and they were both touching the wall, touching a name on the wall. And one of the Johns Creek Veterans Association guides, we had gentlemen, veterans out there just kind of helping people, and he was noticing them, and when they came away from the wall, he introduced himself. His name was Roger Wise, and Roger asked him, introduced himself, and just said, glad you were able to come here. And the young man that was with his, turned out to be his mother, told Roger, I just met my dad today, or tonight. He said, what? And so the mother said this. She said, when my husband went off to Vietnam, and I'm going to get I'm going to get sweaty eyeballs telling the story, David, but here it goes. So the lady said, when my husband went off to Vietnam back in the 60s, I was 3 months pregnant, and he was killed in Vietnam, and he never even knew he had a son. Never, I think she knew she was pregnant, but did not live to hear about the birth of his son. And obviously, the son never met the father until the wall came to Johns Creek, and they said, "I met my dad today," and she said, "I introduced my son to his dad today." And so it's, when we call it the wall that heals, it's exactly that. It is a healing wall. Now, that wall travels around the nation, and it's put up and it's taken down and put up and taken down, and it wears out after a while. So every 4 or 5 years, they put it up for auction. So right now there's we think about 4 across the United States, and cities and organizations can bid on that wall. Well, this wall, again, was up in 2017, and soon thereafter came up for bid, and the city of Johns Creek bid on it based on the recommendation of the Johns Creek Veterans Association, and we won the bid.
Fantastic.
That wall is in a warehouse as we speak in Johns Creek. It is being erected as we speak. The ground's being prepared, and it will be dedicated, I think it's the 16th of November this year, and it'll be permanently installed in the Veterans Memorial Walk there at Newtown Park in Johns Creek. We anticipate this will be literally thousands and thousands of people can come throughout the year to visit that wall and the Veterans Walk that has monuments for World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Purple Heart, women in the military, and so forth. It's a very inspirational walk to see, so I'd encourage people to come there, even now or even before the wall goes up. But you'll see it. I'm sure you'll give PSAs about it, and it'll be advertised across the state of Georgia. But it's a wonderful thing. By the way, the wall, the traveling wall, is going to be 3 through 7 October in Blue Ridge, Georgia. So again, if you want to see the wall at your local, and they travel all over the nation. So in Blue Ridge, 3 through 7 October, it'll be in Blue Ridge, Georgia.
No Blue Ridge well. With my cabin on the lake was on the, my view was on the Chamber of Commerce brochure for many, many years.
Is that right?
And,
that's beautiful country up there.
Yeah, it is. And it got a little crowded for me, and that's why I sold it. But
I've been invited to speak at that opening ceremony, and I'm very humbled to do that.
Is it going to be in their square that they've done?
I'm not familiar about the location,
okay.
but I'm working with the folks that are putting that together. David, I mentioned earlier. Let me say this, and I did not say this earlier. Let me say what the mission of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and quote, mission statement of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame is this: the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame exists only to honor Georgia veterans and to educate Georgia youth and our citizens about real heroes, and to underline the word real heroes. That is one of the most misused words in our vocabulary, is the word hero. The fact that an individual can knock a baseball out of a park, the fact that a person can sing a beautiful song, the fact that a person can do a great performance at a play, that's God-given talent. That does not qualify under the heading of hero. Heroes are those men and women that at one time in their life they raised their right hand and they took that solemn, sacred oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When they take that oath, they're basically quoting 2 Bible verses. One I've already kind of mentioned, but I'll mention the other one now. The other one is Isaiah 6:8. Isaiah 6:8 asks 2 questions and is immediately followed by an answer. Here's the 2 questions. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? The answer is, here am I, send me. When an individual raises their right hand, they're saying basically, here am I, send me. I'm ready to defend our country. And if need be, they're quoting John 15:13, because if greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for a friend. I say that oath, anybody taking the oath of enlistment or commissioning for a United States military, is basically quoting two Bible verses. Selfless service and stoic sacrifice is what a veteran's all about.
Sir, I've got to ask the two things, and I think, I wouldn't swear to it, but I think they both came out of Vietnam. I got your 6, or I got your back. Did both of those come out of Vietnam?
As far as I know, yeah. There were a lot of great terms that came out of Vietnam, and I think I would agree with you that did. Maybe it was in other wars too, but for sure. And it probably, I got your 6, probably was more of an Air Force or naval aviation term, because they were, because you can't see behind a plane. So I would probably give credit to our great aviators that brought that up, but then it permeated across the military.
I don't know, and I hope that you never had to call in a dust-off, but those guys, okay, you're a lot smarter than I am, and all officers will admit to being a lot smarter than grunts, but being a lot smarter than, what's the word past hero? Because that's what a dust-off pilot is, in my opinion. There's got to be is it a hero squared, or what would you say to those pilots were incredible?
I actually did. I served 2 tours in Vietnam on the ground as an infantry young lieutenant and captain, and we had some interesting times in combat, and I saw some very heroic dust-off pilots. I mean, stories that would take me a while to tell you. In fact, we have several dust-off pilots in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I know.
These guys...
or not in the Hall of Fame, but you have 1 or 2 in JCs, right?
Yeah, we do. And they're just... I mean, you talk about selflessness. My goodness. I saw these guys come in a hail of fire because there were dead or dying Americans laying out there that they had to get out. And they would come in and just... taking wounds themselves, taking dust off helicopters getting riddled with machine gun fire, and just really selfless, heroic. Now, they wouldn't call themselves heroes, by the way, but they said, hey, my buddy's on the ground, a guy I don't know, it doesn't matter, but he's an American, and Vietnamese civilians and so forth. It didn't matter. I saw him get people out, Vietnamese babies that were not injured, but they needed to get them out, and these guys are just unbelievable, and we're fortunate to have those kind of people in our military.
And not only, I want to throw out one too. Besides the pilots, but the medics that served with them in the back of the plane, they were taking fire just like the pilots were, and besides knowing the sound of an AK-47, the sound of an M16, what's the third major sound that you would think of in Vietnam?
Medic! and if you're in the Marine Corps, Corbin! Yeah, those medics, again, and that sound of that Huey coming in. The first man that, in my unit that was killed was my medic. And that happened on the 27th day of February 1968. And he and I were with arm's length of each other, and we were going into a bad situation, and he was dead before he hit the ground. And his replacement that came in, we're still good friends, quite good friends. So I got, those guys are brave. They would just go through hell of fire to get to a wounded soldier, a wounded buddy, and just total sacrifice for themselves.
And I want to point out, and I'm sure you know it better than I do, but some of those medics had taken the route of conscientious objectors, and and it's not because they didn't have a set, it was just that they didn't want to carry a weapon.
Yeah, but I tell you what, as far as I'm concerned, they're braver than I was. Here they're out there with no way to defend themselves, and I've seen them lay on their bodies on over a wounded soldier so that they would get hit and not him. It didn't matter if they carried a weapon or not. They just were, those are heroes in my words. And so, I got all kinds of respect for medics, medevac pilots, and so forth. everybody contributes.
If you're in the game, yeah, you get the ball at some point or the other, don't you?
David, let me give you a little quick story. Before I do that, let me tell you about, I talked about what is a Georgia veteran. You either were born in the state, lived in the state 10 years, or you raised your right hand, took the sacred oath in the state. There's 3 categories that you can be nominated: valor, achievement, and service. Valor, an individual did something heroic in combat against an enemy of the United States where he or she received a Valor Award. That would be Bronze Star for Valor, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, Navy Cross, Air Force Cross. Medal of Honor is a separate category, but a Valor Award. Achievement, someone's done something notable while on active duty, while in service. And service, you've done something good or notable for mankind after active duty. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one comes to mind is Donna Rowe. Donna Rowe lives in Marietta, Georgia, and Donna Rowe was a U.S. Army nurse in Vietnam. And she saved many servicemen's life, the men that were wounded there. But what she was noted for was saving the lives of Vietnamese babies, one of which she saved the life of, brought it back to health and life. And this little Vietnamese baby was adopted by a Navy captain and brought back to the United States. And years later, I mean decades later, Donna Rowe and this Vietnamese now woman, total successful American Vietnamese background, but American, they got to meet. And I think the lady, the Vietnamese lady, was now in her 30s, and Donna, and it was very emotional. In fact, there's even been a movie about that. So that was service. Donna Rowe received, it's in the Hall of Fame for under service, Under achievement, we have a gentleman that many people know around the Atlanta area, Mel Pender. Mel Pender was a soldier, a captain in Vietnam, and in between Vietnam tours went to the Mexico Olympics and won the gold medal. At the time, in 1968, he was one of the fastest humans on the planet. And Mel Pender's a good friend of mine, has nothing to do, I didn't get him in the Hall of Fame, he was nominated under his own rights. But that was achievement. He did a great thing. I mean, the gold medal in the Mexico Olympics in 1968 and between Vietnam tours. We have a young Marine received under the Valor category. His name is Jeffrey Cole from Woodstock, Georgia, United States Marine Corps. And he received the Silver Star in Afghanistan, where they were under attack and the machine gunner got hit. I don't know if he was killed or wounded, but he was anyway hit. And Jeffrey took over the machine gun and saved the squad that he was with from being annihilated and overrun. And Jeffrey was wounded also. And by the way, Jeffrey is our youngest inductee into the Hall of Fame, and always kid him. I said, "You're the best looking one." He's in that great looking Marine Corps uniform down in the Hall of Fame, and so he's a great American. We have, and these are just spatterings. I'm just giving you some examples. Lee Ellis lives in Dawsonville, Georgia. Lee Ellis was a young Air Force captain in Vietnam, shot down, and was a POW for 5.5 years. We have several Vietnam POWs in the Hall of Fame, but Lee Ellis, a great American, he would be good to have on your show here. He does motivational talks around the state of Georgia and all over the nation. Colonel, retired U.S. Air Force, Lee Ellis. Here's a gentleman that's deceased, but it's a wonderful story. Robert Gibbs from Decatur, Georgia, he graduated from Georgia Tech, and he went in the Navy. It's World War II, and became the youngest submarine commander in the U.S. Navy in World War II. At the end of the World War II, he was given the order to decommission all the Japanese submarines, after the war's over in Japan. And he did that. And so now he comes back to Atlanta, and he goes to Emory Medical School, becomes a medical doctor. Robert Gibbs. He becomes a very well-known, famous doctor here in the Atlanta area. And then he retired after years, elderly gentleman at the point. And, he said, I've got all this knowledge, experience as a doctor, and I got all this time on my hand. And so he started going all over the state of Georgia, doing home visits, charging no one anything, delivering babies in people's homes, doing house calls, taking no money. I mean, what a heartwarming thing. So not only was he distinguished career in World War II in the Navy, his service to mankind afterwards is heartwarming. I mean, out of his own pocket and time, he said, I got enough money, I don't need that. And he went all over the state, going to visit people that could not afford medical help or could not get the medical help, and he went to their homes. Robert Gibbs. I mean, these stories go on and on and on. So if you're ever down at the Hall of Fame, you can read these citations. There's 100 so far, just by coincidence. We didn't design it that way. And this year, after November the 2nd, the induction ceremony, there'll be 115, because we'll put in 15 this year. So it's just a heartwarming experience, and I'm very humbled to be a part of this and be able to tell this story across Georgia.
You know, Rick, like you said, sort of like the movie To Hell and Back with Audie Murphy. And, you know, he wound up being a star, obviously, but in reality, the humility of the folks like you've just spoken of, there's not a one of them that raises his hand and says, look at me.
Oh, no.
There's something in their DNA that we need to figure out what it is and give everybody a shot of it.
David, as I go around the state, I normally, there's two things I always do. One, I quote those two Bible verses about the sacredness of that oath that we take, and both of them, as far as I'm concerned, refer to those two Bible verses, Isaiah 6:8 and John 15:13. And the second thing I always try to do is talk about, as you just said, David, the humility of a service member. And I call it a stoic sacrifice. You know, it's just stoic. Here's the story. I was asked in January 2015 to do a eulogy for a friend of mine who is also a Vietnam veteran. And when I say friend, I mean we grew up together in Norcross, Georgia, and played football together on a Norcross football team. He was a couple of years older than me. And he died in January of 2015 of causes from Agent Orange and other complications, and he still had shrapnel in his body from way back in the day in 1968. The gentleman's name is David Verner, and he grew up right on the Chattahoochee River, where Holcomb Bridge crosses the Chattahoochee River from Fulton County into Gwinnett County in the Little White House. And his brother, who was a Navy veteran, asked me to say a few words at his funeral, and I did, and I was honored to do it. And so I didn't know much about what he did in Vietnam, and nobody did. But his brother, Bill Verner, said, hey, Rick, I got his Bronze Star for Valor citation. So I said, got it. And I was blown away. I mean, it should have been a Silver Star. It should have been a great award. Now, here's the point. David Verner was probably one of the quietest men you would ever meet. I mean, we used to kid him and said he said 3 words a year. I mean, he just didn't talk. Humble as he could be. And if you would ask David Verner, here's what I said at his eulogy. If you asked David, weren't you in the Army? He said, yeah, I was in the Army. Well, what'd you do, David? Oh, I was just a generator mechanic. And that would be the end of that. Well, David, didn't you go to Vietnam? Yeah, I was in Vietnam. Well, David, what'd you do in Vietnam? Oh, I was just a generator mechanic. That's it. You just heard his whole military career, according to him. And then I told the people in the audience at that funeral, and there were high school friends there. There were his grandchildren, his children. No one had ever heard what I was getting ready to tell them. And I told them, I said, that's how he would describe his military service and his time in Vietnam. And he was, quote, just a generator mechanic. I said, ladies and gentlemen, and children and grandchildren, let me tell you about your grandfather, your father, and your friend, David Verner. This just generator mechanic. And I started reading this Bronze Star for Valor. February 1968, the middle of the Tet Offensive. The fire base that David was on was being overrun, not only by North Vietnamese soldiers, but by their artillery and mortars. And this just generator mechanic had to make sure the generators kept running. Why was that important? Because without generators, they didn't have radio communications. And without radio communications, they could not get out their dead and their wounded. They could not call in artillery against the enemy. They could not get reinforcements. They could not get water, food, and ammunition without those radios. And without the radios, they couldn't have that. And without the generators, they couldn't have the radios. And David Verner was out there throughout this battle, a long battle, with his head down next to that generator, keeping it running. And he couldn't hear the mortars coming in and the artillery coming in because his head was down by that generator. And so he was peppered with shrapnel as they're being attacked. And in the citation, it talks about this fire base would have been overrun, save for the fact of David Verner doing his job, just a generator mechanic. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, in Washington, D.C., there's a wall, and on that wall there's 58,315 names. Without David Verner, this just generator mechanic, there would be more than 58,315. Don't ever let a veteran tell you, oh, I was just a fill in the blank. Every job that a veteran does is important. Every veteran has taken that oath to defend his country.
And as you well know, there isn't such quote, end quote, as just a generator mechanic. The first thing you learn in the Army is everybody's an infantryman.
That's right. Everybody's taking up that weapon to defend. That's right.
So, Rick, this has been more than fantastic, and we got a couple of minutes, about a couple of minutes to go. But one, you have accepted my order to come back.
Yes, sir.
I got to write this down.
Yes, Sergeant.
But we're going to do more than just have you back. We're going to. Well, we'll talk after the show.
If you got 1 minute, I can.
Yes, sir.
I would encourage the listening audience, whether you know anybody or not that's going to be inducted. The induction ceremony is always on the first Saturday in November in Columbus, Georgia. It's always at the St. Luke's Ministry Center. It can seat and feed over 500 people. If you can do that, it starts at 6 o'clock. Make sure you bring 2 handkerchiefs at least. It is an emotional event. There's no guest speakers. It's all about the citations for the inductees. Everybody that's ever attended one, they'll always tell me, I will never forget this the rest of my life. It's just a humbling experience to see and hear about these people that have made our freedom what it is today, free.
So important, and what's the old saying? History repeats itself, and you are history, and what you're doing at the Hall of Fame is wonderful history, beautiful history. I will be down to see you. We're going to, Rick and I are going to talk after the show, and we're going to see if we can't do more for the Hall of Fame than just one show. In fact, we're going to talk real serious about this, and just get, as I mentioned when I went the one night to the JC, Johns Creek Veterans Association. The one thing you can be assured of is that everybody sitting around you has at least one, if not 100 stories. Mm-hmm. And those stories are wonderful. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And they're not me stories, just like we were talking. Yeah. They're not me stories. I knew this guy named Rick White that did this or did that. And I knew this lady that if it wasn't for her, mm-hmm. and it's always beautiful. So with that being said, we're going to end this Dave's Pick, and we'll have more coming your way right after a couple of announcements, and we appreciate you listening. Rick White, thank you, sir, for coming out, and we're going to do more, and we're going to get the Hall of Fame known nationally.
Thank you, sir.
We'll be back right after this.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make...
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio, and we're glad to have you listening in today. And this is always a fun thing, and today it's sort of a mixed thing. It's end of one era and the beginning of another one. And on the line with us today on what was the NSPS Hour is now the Land Surveyors Hour. And we have the host of the NSPS Hour, former host, Mr. Kurt Sumner, on, and he's the guest of our new host of the Land Surveying Hour, Mr. Tony Nettleman. And I should say Dr. Charles Nettleman, but anyway, we're glad to have Tony on, and Tony taking over the reins of the Land Surveying Hour. And welcome both of you to America's Web Radio on Labor Day. Good morning.
Well, welcome to the new show. I'm really excited. It's always a little bit scary when something changes, but I'm excited for a brand new show, the Land Surveyors Radio Hour. And there's no better person to interview for the new show than the person who ran the NSPS Radio Hour for many years, Kurt Sumner. So, Kurt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Tony. By the way, before we get down the road too far, it may or may not be worth anything to you as you go ahead, but as you know, as the show progresses, and I'm not sure what your timing is, if it's every week or whatever your schedule is, but any time that you have an interest in doing it, I'm happy to hook you up with people I know that you might want to have on the show, or if somebody has something interesting to say, I'll certainly let you know about it. So I'm sure you'll be able to find guests on your own, but if you ever think you want any assistance in doing it, I'm really happy to help you out.
Yeah, that'd be great. You know, it's always, I was looking back at some of your archives over the years for your show, and the variety of guests was always just fantastic. You know, practicing surveyors, academics, business owners, employees. I mean, it was a really well-rounded guest list. And I hope we'll continue on with that tradition and just be able to learn from all of these people's experiences.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And another thing that I think will be helpful is we can maintain a relationship for you with the guys at NGS. You know, they are really good about coming on the show and talking about whatever's going on. You know, the 2022 thing's coming up, so we've done some talk about that over time, and I'm sure they'll have an interest in outreach as well, because as the time gets closer, then it becomes, I don't know if urgent's the right word, but I think a lot of people will come to the realization, hey, this is really happening. You know how it is when something new is going to happen. You think about, yeah, this is going to be new, and we got to do this and we got to do that, but you don't really think about it till the day before, kind of. So.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you got so many urgent things going on you're dealing with. You don't have time for the stuff coming up in a year from now. And it seems like things get delayed, and we all sort of hope that it'll be pushed off by a year or something. But there's some big stuff coming up in surveying, like this 2022 datum. And I watched the webinar last month, and it was hard for me to comprehend all the different intricacies of how this sausage is made. So I think that hopefully NGS will be able to kind of put it into terms we can all appreciate and get ready for this big change.
Yeah, and I think they're doing a really good job of that. One of the things that comes with that I think a lot of folks haven't thought about yet was also the concept of the foot. You know, we've always had the survey foot, we had the international foot, we've had this, that, and the other. And so the concept going forward is, because the difference between what we're talking about with the new datum and any kind of changeover is that the difference between what we typically surveyors think of as the foot and the definition is pretty small. So it's not like it's going to be a major thing. And as a matter of fact, Michael Dennis, I don't know if you might know Michael, but Michael was at our board meeting last spring and sort of out rolling everything out, and he was concerned about talking about the foot. And I told him not to worry too much about it because it's not the meter. You know, when we were trying to do the metric conversion, then boy, that just really got a lot of people bent out of shape. But this transition, I think, will be a lot smoother. So again, not setting your agenda for you, but I think that there will be some interest in that topic as we go through the next year or so.
Sure, and that can be a very a heated debate because I've always said, you know, why don't we just go to the meter? Was going, you know, they do all their work in meters anyways at NGS, and they kind of convert it over for us, I think. But it's just so, you know, ridiculous to have two versions of the foot and then the meter. And that's one of the ways I torture my introductory to survey students is I quiz them on the U.S. survey foot versus the international foot. And most of the time it doesn't matter. But if you're in state plane coordinates, you have a million digit number, and you're doing the wrong conversion, then you get into some major problems.
Right. Yeah. And that's easier to deal with. I started to say easier to comprehend, but it's easier to deal with you know, all the technology we have today. You know, it's not like it was years ago when that kind of computation would just scare you right out of your mind if it wasn't something you did on a regular basis.
Sure.
So I think that'll be a big help as well. And speaking of education, by the way, I know you've got the program going, and from what you and I've talked about over time, it sounds like it's starting off on pretty good footing.
Yeah, it's great. You know, I opened up a one-year certificate of land surveying engineering, which just got accredited and approved by the Texas Workforce Commission in May, I think. And we took in our first student as kind of a test subject to run all the courses to make sure it's all good. But, you know, it's amazing how much time it took for the government regulators to approve. And now we're working on an associate's program coming online in December, I think. So I think the surveying part is the easy part. The regulatory and business part is the difficult one.
Yeah, and I think that's probably always the case for those of us who are mathematically inclined, but not necessarily criteria or the kind of regulation that we have to deal with sometimes. And so there's no question about that. So, and you and I've talked about this before, and I really think that a lot of the future for us, and I think a lot of the people who are into the distance learning, even at the universities, will tell you the same thing, that there's a thought out there that I've always had in terms of finding the next generation. We really want to go hard after the young people, and you know what we're doing in NSPS. We're at the grade school level at this point with get kids in the survey, or at least pre-high school.
I love that. Yeah, I've seen some of the materials, and they're A+ materials. I really think you're going to capture a lot of people with that. Get kids in the surveying initiative.
Yeah, I think so too, and that still may not be enough. And so this concept that we're now going to be offering a broader range of education opportunities to get people prepared that can be accessed by those already working in the profession. You know, I've talked about that before. You know, that's kind of was my background. I worked for 2 or 3 years out of high school before I went back to school to become a surveyor. But there were limited options back then. But I think this distance thing that's going on across the country, your program and the ones at the universities, I think it's just going to open up the door for a lot of people that are already interested. And I just hope that we'll focus it that way and take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think so too. And, my dream is to have an always available, high-quality education for anybody that wants it at a fair price. They want a bachelor's, an associate's, a certificate. They want their continuing education or test prep for surveying. Whatever they want, it's available to them, and it's high quality. It's made by national authorities, and it's inexpensive. And if we can do that, I really think we'll open the door to a lot more people, because a lot of surveyors want to get an education, but they're too busy working, 10-hour days in the field to move across the country to some major university.
Exactly. And I honestly think you'll find that there may be people that have gone through university in a different curriculum. Because I get calls about this from people from time to time where they say, well, I went to school to do this, but, I'd kind of like to do something, and surveying sounds really interesting. But, it's a whole different transition. So I think, again, you might have people that start out in different careers who find an interest in it, and then they'll have the opportunity to pick up what they need to combine with their previous education to still be able to get in.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And when I worked at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, we had a one-year post-bac certificate. So if you had a bachelor's degree, come in, get 32 hours, and sit for the Texas exam. And there were a ton of people who were like ecology majors, German polka history majors, whatever, that couldn't really find their calling after their bachelor's. And they said, I'm going to get a little more practical this time. And even before they graduated that year, they had jobs waiting on them, and they were good money.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure they were. So I know we only got a couple minutes left before the break here. I'm kind of watching my clock as well. Sorry, that's the old host in me. I can't help myself. So I'm open to talking about whatever. I know you want me to talk a little bit about some of the things that's going on in NSPS, and I'll do that. I think it'd be great for the audience, maybe people who don't know you and your family history and your background, to hear about that, because to me that's a really interesting and exciting thing that not too many people share with you in terms of heritage when it comes to surveying. I mean, a lot of people who work for their dad or something and go into the business, and that's been sort of a historic thing, or maybe end up going to college because their dad was doing surveying. But I think that's a great story that you have, too.
Well, we only have about 1.5 minutes until our break, but just quickly, I started surveying with my grandfather, Walt Robillard, many, many years ago when he was a consultant after working for the Forest Service for a career. And I got to, work on really complex boundary, title, easement disputes when I was, 12, 13 years old. And a lot of people get the technical side of surveying first and then go into the legal in college or as a PLS. But I sort of got the legal first as an attorney, and then got the technical side as I worked in the field for many years. So it's been such a great honor to kind of edit the textbooks like Clark and Brown, even as a teenager with Mr. Robillard. But now I do a lot of consulting, just like we did before, sort of following in Walt's footsteps, and also teach a lot of college courses. So one of the best things about that is being able to share these crazy stories with my students, so they never have to do the mistakes. It just drives a stake in your heart when you see a surveyor pay out a 7-figure settlement from an insurance claim. And I hope if I tell those stories to my students, they'll learn what not to do.
Right.
But we're on our break in just about 20 seconds. So if I haven't said this before, Kurt, thank you so much for being our guest. And we'll take a quick break and be right back.
Quick Stakes is your answer to staking. Lightweight, easy to ride on, easy to use, easy to find, and won't break your back carrying them like the old-fashioned wooden stakes. Have you tried a sample? If not, get a pen and paper and write down this number, 800-438-0387, or go to quickstake.com. That's QUIKSTAKE.com, and order your samples. Ask your surveying supply dealer for Quick Stakes today. Quick Stakes. Does your survey supply dealer have Quick Stakes? If not, demand that they start carrying Quick Stakes. Did you know that Quick Stakes are better for your back than your local chiropractor? lightweight and easier to use than the old heavy wooden stake. Order a sample today and prove it to yourself. Quick Stakes, your bike-friendly stake.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And welcome back to the Land Surveyors Hour on America's Web Radio with our new host, Tony Nettleman. And gosh, Tony, you just couldn't decide what you wanted to be. You're an engineer, surveying engineer, licensed in a number of states. Texas, my home state, as a matter of fact, and we're very proud to have you hosting the show. You're licensed in Florida, California, New Mexico, South Dakota. The only place you don't mention is the swamp, but I'm sure you could get away with it. And you're also an attorney, a licensed attorney. So you just can't decide what you want to do, can you? What are you going to be when you grow up?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what I'll be when I grow up, but I'm still figuring it out. I love taking tests and sharing my experiences with other people. And in fact, I'm just about to launch a vlog series where I kind of video log all of my experiences getting licensed in each state. So I'm entertained by exams, and I hope before I die I'll be licensed in all 50 states.
Well, that's quite ambitious, and I'm sure if you need any tutoring or anything like that, Kurt would raise his hand and tell you what to do in Virginia or something.
Well, Kurt has a lot of common sense, so I'm always leaning on Kurt's common sense to figure things out. He's a very smart guy.
Yeah, he is, and he got away from us, but that's we still got him sort of. But anyway, we're glad to have you. Glad to have you taking over the reins, and one of these days when you're down here in Atlanta, we'll put the video camera on you, and we'll really sit around the round table and have fun. Maybe we can get you and Kurt down at the same time. That would be fun. That would be a lot of fun.
That would be amazing. I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey, the radio personality, and he broadcasts his radio show on YouTube every day. And the video quality and the studio he has just makes me drool. It's incredible.
Well, ours isn't quite that elaborate, but we don't believe in killing a fly with a sledgehammer. But at the same token, we are on YouTube. In fact, I'll put out a remark right quick. We're on every podcast server that we know about, Spotify, up and down the gambit, iTunes. This show will be archived tomorrow, and will be available for listeners anytime they want to download it. And if for some reason we're not on your podcast player, please let us know, and we'll get on it immediately. But we're on every one that we know about, and we're the largest.
That's great.
The largest producing podcast radio station in the country. No one else touches us with the number of shows that we do and submit, and that we do ourselves. So you can listen to Tony and Kurt tomorrow on any of the stations you want to. So with that, I'll let you all get back to the business at hand.
Thank you, David. What a gift Kurt has given us over the years. There are so few resources about land surveying, blogs or radio shows or even magazines, and what a gift. So again, Kurt, thank you for all the work you've done over the years.
It's been my pleasure. It's always been fun for me. It never felt like a job at all. It was just fun to do, and always find interesting people to talk to. That's one of the great things about traveling around all over the place. You run into so many great people, and have, like you've said, everybody's got a story to tell. And so it's always good to be able to do that. By the way, getting back into my interviewer mode again, I know I'm interested, and everybody else probably on the show is interested too. How is Walt doing?
Walt is doing great. He spends his days watching Matlock and gardening. He's kind of homebound at this point, but he is taking an ethics course at the local senior center trying to improve himself, and That's classic Walt, and he's doing great.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is he going to help you out some on what you're doing? Or maybe
Absolutely.
he'll do that now. Okay.
Yeah, Walt is teaching the Introductory to Surveying course, and he's got some life lessons for everybody to share with. So he's an instructor at the university, Nettleman Institute, and I really hope that even though he is 90 years old, he can still share sort of nuggets of information with the students and do what he loves to do, which is stay busy.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the term was used before, but icon is certainly a term for him. Anybody, I'm 71 years old, and even people who came along when I did, early on in our careers, we knew who he was. We might not have known him at the time. I had the great pleasure of getting to know him over time. I had a lot of fun chatting back and forth with him, but that's quite an accomplishment, so to speak, to have him still be able to participate.
Absolutely. And, he's sort of a non-traditional educator because he didn't really teach at the universities. He taught, CEUs, he wrote books, articles, testified, things like that. But I understand how much of an impact he's had. Last year I was at the Mississippi Conference, and I had one of my students come up to me, and the student was a pretty good student, 10 years ago in the bachelor's program at Troy. And, I wouldn't say he's a great student, he's a pretty good student. But he came up to me, and he was licensed, he had his own business, he had a family, and he, wow, this is amazing. What an impact this education has had on his life. And the same thing for Walt. I have many people who call me, attorneys and surveyors, and they say, I saw Walt in 1965 at a seminar he was teaching, and I decided to change my life. And that's incredible, 50 years later, and they're still affected by his message.
Yeah, all of us from back in those days fondly remember the overhead slides. He had those, and he was always shuffling through those, and it was just, he was not only educational, he was entertaining to be around.
Sure. And a lot of the stuff he's taught me, which is great, and I'm getting ready to take over his books because he just really doesn't have the capacity to continue authoring textbooks anymore at his age. And a lot of the core lessons are in these books. I think Clark on Surveying has been cited over 100 times in civil court cases. And I write a lot of expert reports every month, and I attach the list of cases where these books have been cited, and they're just pages and pages and pages of court cases.
Oh, yeah, speaking of books, I think Trish got back to you last week about the definitions book. We're reprinting it with a new cover right now with the mission of hopefully within the next year having an updated version. But there's still demand for them. So we've made a new order with a little different cover on it just to demonstrate that, we've done a few things, but primarily that rewrite, so to speak, is going to be going on during this next year, and hopefully we'll have the new version out. As you well know, there's terms change, or the way people interpret them changes over time, and then all the new terms that have come along. That version, I think, was an 05 version, if I'm correct. So, yeah, there's been a lot changed since then. So just for your audience, when people are looking for the definitions book, it will have a little different look if you order it, but it still have the same content probably for another year.
Now, who is going to be updating that book, Kurt?
Well, that's a good question. We're in the process of putting out a request for proposals of sorts to try to find the right people or the right person to do that. The last time it was done, and there's still some discussion about whether that might occur again, there was a group of students at University of Maine that were led by a professor to do the revision that was the 05 revision. And so there's discussion about, well, they're going to go back that route again, but I think what's going to happen is there'll be an RFP that will be put out in general, not just to universities, but to other folks who may have an interest in providing that service. So that's all still being discussed at the moment, and we didn't have the answer yet, so that's why we decided to go ahead and do the reprint so we could keep up with orders between now when the revision. But
that's a good
I
idea.
can't tell you exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that I buy these things in 500 box units, and I can't keep them in stock. I don't know who's buying them and for what reason, but I have one young lady in my office, and it seems like all she does is repackage and ship off ACSM books. It drives us crazy.
Yeah, and that's, we've had that experience over time as well. There's a few booksellers that get them, but a lot of people order them directly from us too. So, yeah, they've been very, very popular, and we've reprinted that thing a number of times, and it's just time to update it, as you know.
I agree. A lot of terms are really good, legal terms, but there's a lot of new technology that's just not in the book because think of laser scanning, drones, all kinds of things that were not around in 2005 that have just taken over in the past 1 or 2 decades. But it's such a handy book. I cite it all the time, and I think it's so important I give my students the copies for free when they buy test prep items, because a lot of the surveying exams are just pure definitions.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of surveying exams, I have another question for you. What
sure.
do you take? What's your take on the latest situation in Texas with the licensing board and it kind of going back, I don't know, within or among the engineering board when it was a separate board? I don't know enough about that to know what the impact looks like it might be going down the road, and maybe you don't either. I was just curious if you had an opinion about that.
Well, being an attorney, I have an opinion about everything. So, but the problem is, as you get a little bit older, you realize, your opinion counts, but there's no one answer. What is the ideal level of surveying education? And a certificate, a bachelor's, an associate's? I don't know. And I want to see some studies, maybe by some labor statisticians or something, which shows how degrees benefit surveyors. Because a couple years ago, I would say a bachelor's for every surveyor. But a lot of people's circumstances are different. And being able to factually back up what degree is required to practice is a really deep question. But it's 27 past the hour, so I think we're going to go to our next break. Is that right, former host, Mr. Sumner?
Sounds good to me.
Quick Stakes is your answer to staking. Lightweight, easy to ride on, easy to use, easy to find, and won't break your back carrying them like the old-fashioned wooden stakes. Have you tried a sample? If not, get a pen and paper and write down this number, 800-438-0387, or go to quickstake.com. That's QUIKSTAKE.com and order your samples. Ask your surveying supply dealer for Quick Stakes today.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. My guest today is Mr. Kurt Sumner of NSPS. And, I've always thought of NSPS as a liaison organization. You guys talk to the state societies, you talk to individual surveyors, you talk to the government. But tell us, what does NSPS do?
Well, I like to think of NSPS as sort of a glue, an adhesive of sorts that binds the profession together in an overall sense. One of the things that we're really fortunate about in the U.S. is that we have, for the most part, really strong surveying associations in each of the states. And that goes back decades. I know in my case in Virginia, our association's been around since the early part of last century, probably maybe in the 30s or 40s. And that's true to a large degree across the country. And those organizations have historically dealt with issues that were of interest to surveyors in the state, as you would develop relationships with the licensing boards to try to have a representation there. I know licensing boards usually have some number of professionals, and they have some public members. And we've always been lucky in my home state of Virginia from a licensing board perspective, because from the very beginning, the engineers, architects, and surveyors all have equal numbers on the board. And when I first got involved in NSPS, I assumed that was true everywhere, and then I found that it isn't true anywhere, actually. I don't think, other than in my home state. And so just the idea that you have a really strong group of surveyors who are interested in the profession and well-versed and well-spoken, representing our profession in that way at the licensing board level. And then as time has gone along, everything changes, and so our relationships are strong there, but now and for the last number of decades, we've needed a strong national voice that could be a cohesive voice and one that's representative of the profession in general on the national level, whether it's legislation or regulation or whatever the case may be. And so we didn't really have that. We had American Congress on Surveying and Mapping, which was a broader entity covering what were then disparate practice areas. Now today, as you know, people do pretty much all of those things at the same time in the geodesy side and the surveying side and all the other elements that were ACSM. And so NSPS became the strongest among those just because of numbers and because of interest. And so what really happened to the organization was NSPS was about 98% of the membership, but only had one vote among 4 votes within the leadership. And so that meant that the specific interest of the surveying profession may not have been what the message was. And that's not to say that we're with odds with our geodesist friends or our photogrammetry friends, or we're all in the same business. It's just that we have a special interest in certain things, and particularly on the legislative side. And so an effort went forward a while back in the early part of the 2010 decade, and even before that to some degree, and that's when NSPS sort of took control of the organization, like I said, because we were 99% of the member, 98% of the membership anyway. And we had hoped that our brothers and sisters in the other surveying-related professions would hang in there with us, and all of us focus on the good of the profession, whether it's land surveyors or geodesy surveyors or whatever the case may be. And but that didn't work out as well as we had hoped. But what did happen that was a good thing, we set up a membership agreement with all the surveying societies in the country. The only 2 that aren't part of our joint membership program are California and Arkansas. The District of Columbia is part of it with their surveyors group. So what that did for us, it not only gave us a stronger base from which to draw leadership, it gave us a more of a cohesive voice for the surveying profession across the country, and gave us a stronger base from which to talk, because before we did the joint membership, there were only around 4,000 to 5,000 licensed surveyors who were members of NSPS ACSM. But when we made the deal with the state societies, now our numbers are varying from year to year depending on how old people get or people coming and going into the profession, but just as a good round number, around 15 to 16,000.
That's amazing. What a huge increase.
Yeah, it is. The sad part is, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are 40,000 or 42,000 licensees in the country. And now you have to take into account that not all of them are private practice, or not all of them are members of state societies. So you do have that to deal with. But we'd like to have more members, but we're really pleased that we've been able to work this arrangement with our state societies, because it not only helps from numbers and representation, it helps in the consistency of message. that we're all using. So that was critical for us as a profession, I think, to work with our peers and people in our overall realm and people outside of our realm. You know, we deal with other professionals and obviously with the public. So it was a great thing for us to be able to have those bigger numbers that gave us more opportunity to have our message heard.
I agree. You know, it was a turbulent time, you know, splitting from ACSM, but overall, I think, you know, NSPS and its members are better off for it. And being an attorney, I like to think of these things called model rules. And the model rule is written by kind of a national organization, and then it kind of disseminates to all the state bars. And there could be model rules on ethics, professional responsibility, billing, finance, anything. But having a big organization to author those is a huge help. And at some point, I'd like to see NSPS offering some model rules on education, experience, statutes of limitations, so that everyone else can pick those up and benefit from them.
That makes a lot of sense.
But speaking of having one vote, kind of an equal vote, I just passed my California exam a few months ago, and I was doing some research in their statutes. They have a 12-person board, and only one person is a land surveyor. And you say, what? I mean, you just can't believe it. So I'm glad to hear Virginia is proportional.
Yeah, and like I said before, we feel really lucky about that. But as you pointed out, California is an example, and really it's more the norm where you have, when it's a joint board. You know, a lot of states still have individual boards, and Texas did until recently, of course. And so I think those work better. You know, one of the things that's always intrigued me a little bit, you may have done enough research to have better information about this than do I, but I know a lot of the states, I'm thinking of Kentucky in particular because I know those guys pretty well, they actually have someone in their board office who is he's sort of the person who takes on issues that come up related to surveying and actually does investigations when issues come in. And not all the states have that. I don't have specific numbers on who does and who doesn't, but that sounds like such a great idea that you have somebody there who can look at the case and assist the board, particularly if it's a mixed board of professions, to have a better perspective on, you know, what took place or what the circumstances are, what's the evidence in the case, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. An investigator. And a lot of the investigators are actually retired detectives. They're not really surveyors. They are law enforcement personalities who come in and investigate. And I wish there were more of those. I know in Texas we have several thousand surveyors, big group of licensed professionals, and I believe there was 2 either part-time or full-time investigators for the entire board of surveying. And I had to write an expert report against a surveyor who was authoring basically fraudulent elevation certificates. And this guy got 13 board complaints, and he was still licensed. And you just don't know how that happens.
Right. You know, speaking of elevation certificates, that's become almost a specialty these days, and one in which we need a lot more people to be participating and making sure that we know what we're doing when we go to fill those out. You know, there's a certified floodplain surveyor thing that got started down in North Carolina years ago, right after Hurricane Floyd, and it's begun to pick up more steam again now. We had some conversation about it over time, but Tennessee just adopted it recently. There's a number of other states that are getting interested in it. And for me, one of the things that I've always thought is important is I think credentialing is important. I think if I'm going to be offering you a service, then, yeah, I've got a right to do it as a licensee, but I also feel like maybe I should have something that says I know about that particular piece of surveying, because, you know, we're not all doing the same thing all the time.
I agree. And, you know, you think of, you know, what's the difference between a license and a certificate? Well, surveyors are licensed. They're regulated by state law. You have to go through all these exams and do your application. But GIS professionals do certificates, like a GISP, where it's a nonprofit organization that administers the exam. It's not required. It's just, it's just good to have. And maybe NSPS could have a certificate in boundary, a certificate in topo, a certificate in flood mapping, and that would just kind of prove your minimum qualifications to do a specialty type of survey.
And it wouldn't have any impact on one's ability to do the work. It's just like anything else. It would be like, well, I've taken the time to do this, and to create this credential for myself. Would never be intended to say, well, you got to have this or you can't do that particular work. Your license allows you to do it. And so I'm not one that says you must have a certification in a particular area if my license gives me the right to do it. But it would be an option that people could take if they wanted to demonstrate that, that particular element.
I agree, and a lot of these things are not compulsory, just like the CFEDS program from the BLM. CFEDS got started as an idea to make sure the tribal surveyed lands were done correctly. And in the beginning, they said, well, surveyors who get a CFED certificate will get kind of a preference in these federal government contracts. Well, that never happened. And then the number of people looking for CFEDs, I think, dropped off substantially because it just wasn't you couldn't get your money back or you couldn't make more money as a CFEDs, in the general practice. So I think, marketing the certification and explaining to our layman property owners would be kind of the most difficult part of the entire thing.
Yeah, one of the things that happened with the CFEDs, we can talk about after break if you want to, because we do their financial work for them and administer their grants and that kind of thing. But one of the things that happened there was that the purchasing of those services was often done by the tribes, and the tribes are not bound by federal procurement. So you couldn't say you must do this. They could do whatever they want. But the certification might give you a leg up with any client, but there wasn't any mechanism to say, okay, you got to hire somebody who has this certification, and so that had an impact. So, but we can talk about that after the break if you want.
Yeah, that's a really interesting subject. I know I purchased the CFEDS materials, and I got to the point to take the exam, and I'll tell you what, the 3 and 4 hour long videos, just shocked your system when you try to watch one of those things. It was. I do a lot of videos for students, and I do like 15-minute tops because if you need to get up and get a cup of coffee or go to the restroom, that's too long of a video, But trying to watch a 3-hour video one time is just too much, at least for me. But we've hit our next break, so again, thanks for coming, and we'll be right back.
Quick Stakes. Does your survey supply dealer have Quick Stakes? If not, demand that they start carrying Quick Stakes. Did you know that Quick Stakes are better for your back than your local chiropractor? Lightweight and easier to use than the old heavy wooden stake. Order a sample today and prove it to yourself. Quick Stakes, your back-friendly stake.
This is Ron Camacho, host of the Business Hour, on Fridays from 10 to 11 a.m. Join me as I talk with passionate professionals on a program that profiles the best businesses, business professionals, business practices, and fascinating individuals to get an insider view of how America works. 10 to 11 a.m. on America's Web Radio.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on America's
Welcome
Web
back. Welcome back. I've got Kurt Sumner with the National Society of Professional Surveyors, a nonprofit organization that works really for the benefit of all land surveyors, whether you're a member or not. and we're talking about all things surveying and all things NSPS. This is our last segment. So, Kurt, I'd like to introduce you as well as a advisory member of the Nettleman Institute of Land Surveying Engineering Technology. And can you tell us more about what you do as a IAC member?
Well, I guess the question should have been, what will I do? Because I'm new. but my understanding is that you have a group of people that you reach out to or engage with, both individually and collectively, to talk about the program, what it's trying to do, and look for ways to make it stronger and make it more appealing. Make sure that you're getting perspective from a number of different places to say, not just one or two people, but a whole group of people who can give you some context, if you will, of, okay, how is what this particular thing, how's that going to apply? What benefit is it going to be to that practicing person out there? All of us either are or have been in practice, so we kind of understand what those what the whole dynamic is. So I just see it more as an advisory group that helps you determine the path you want to follow and the path that your students say they want you to follow.
That's a great explanation. Education and knowledge without the ability to use it is totally worthless. And I know I've gotten really frustrated over the years because some of the surveying programs around the country, even accredited programs, produce graduates without practical skills to apply. And I made the Nettleman Institute so that we could get, the knowledge required to be a great practicing surveyor for really the rest of your life, with continuing education included. But I tried to get all the instructors who have practical knowledge of surveying, not just have a degree. And having a kind of an information corridor between the instructors, the administrators, and practicing surveyors is so important, because you guys tell us what we need to know. And that's how we build the curriculum, from practical knowledge and practical requirements from people like you.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of the schools, I can't say that all of them do, the brick and mortar schools do have advisory boards. As a matter of fact, I sit on a couple of them. And my experiences are that level or that type of input that you're asking for may not be utilized as much in the other programs as it is more about programmatic kind of things. How do we get students? How do we raise money? How do we do this? How do we do that? Maybe more so than what should our curriculum look like? And I won't say that's devoid. It does exist, but I think it's really important to have that as a really vibrant part of whatever group of people you're going to have as advisors.
Yeah, I agree. And, in a big program, the goals for the profession sometimes get kind of muddled because, it's always, meet your budget, get the number of students in, collect the number of money, and keep doing that to grow and grow. Because if you're not growing students, then you'll be shut down very shortly, I can almost promise you. And that's happened to many surveying programs over the past decade. So, institutions are living creatures, and if they're not growing, they're not going to exist much longer. So that's usually the topic of these IAC meetings.
Yes, that's correct. And it's not invalid. It's something you have to do. But it doesn't necessarily accomplish what you've been talking about.
Absolutely. Another weird thing with these, a lot of programs, even not ones I've worked with, there's really been no or very little interaction with state societies. Maybe a professor goes to the annual meeting once per year or other things, but having that back and forth between the profession and the academic program is usually, pretty small. I know when I've interviewed with these positions as a professor, that's the first thing they like to hear is I'm licensed, because I'll fit in with, the professional crew.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. And, the state societies are also really good about, most states have a scholarship program, even if they don't have a school in their state. And that's a good thing. I know in Virginia, we don't really have a program now the way we did in the past, but East Tennessee State has that cooperative agreement with the states that surround it. So our state society actually helps support that program with scholarships, and that's one of the good things that the state societies have done. And it actually is great because we have a scholarship program as well, but having all those states with their own programs for scholarships, helping to draw people in and bring them into the universities to get that education and then be able to continue to stay there. As you know, it's not an inexpensive proposition.
Yeah, you're right. And it's such a symbiotic relationship between the national society, state societies, universities. We all have to work together and have kind of a single message to get the next generation of surveyors educated, licensed, experienced. And that's kind of what NSPS does, is help craft that message and provide it to everyone so we can all work together.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, the other piece that we play that we didn't really talk a whole lot about is you mentioned early on the advocacy part, where we're dealing with the federal government, and we actually now have an official mechanism through which we also track state legislation. And then a lot of the states are really good at tracking it on their own, and that's fantastic. But this is a service that can happen through the same service we use for the federal research, and it really doesn't cost a ton of money. So it just helps us not only from the perspective of being able to say to state ABC, we found out about this, we're not sure if you know about it, hey, but if you did, that's great, but if you didn't, that's also great. But it also helps us in our messaging and what we're looking at in terms of what may be coming down the pike. Because you see things happen sometimes at the state level that feeds its way on to the federal level eventually. So it's good for our own purposes, but it's also good for us being able to reach out and help the states when they want it or need it.
I agree. And I remember I was a student, PhD student at University of Florida, maybe about 10 years ago, and the Republican governor was decided to deregulate land surveying completely in Florida. And I know that NSPS worked pretty closely with the Florida Society to stop that bill. And this is where we're going. A lot of professions are being deregulated, and I think there'll be a big discussion both in our profession and in the government as to whether land surveying will be licensed.
Right, and the other piece of that is the cross-border licensure. We've always said you need to be licensed in our state, and if you're going to come in, you're licensed somewhere else, at least you got to take some level of a state-specific exam. But now there's a lot of pressure coming from different areas, from some states in particular, that are saying, well, we're restricting trade, we need to let anybody come in, and they don't really understand the peculiarities that could exist in a profession like ours from one place to another. So
Sure.
That's another thing that we deal with on a regular basis.
That's great. You are basically a subject matter expert. I know that a friend of mine in New Mexico, when the sunset was on for the licensing there, he went and he testified. He's a professor at New Mexico State, but he testified in front of the New Mexico legislature and explained to them why surveying was so important. And because of his testimony, or partially because of it, they kept surveying as a profession. So, you guys are the ones who are kind of protecting us, I guess we should say.
Right, and I've said this when I was on the radio show so many times, with all the technology we got now, with GIS and GPS and everything else out there to gather data and process data and catalog data, when the rubber meets the road, dealing with land parcels is still a puzzle. All the pieces have to fit. And accurate measure or precise measurement is not always accurate in terms of where it ought to be. So, that's a big thing that's hard to get across to people, and particularly in today's environment, just because of, hey, we can get it in, 20 decimal places, so it's got to be absolutely perfect. And it may be from a precision perspective, but not for an accurate one. So that's another big role for us as surveyors in general, not just us as a society.
Absolutely. I know a professor that went to the SAGES meeting a couple of years ago, the surveyors, educators, he did a piece on how technology has progressed in land surveying over the past 500 years, and it's like an exponential curve. And we're undergoing so many changes as a profession right now, it's really disorienting. And being able to keep our profession and our kind of mindset and also change with all this new stuff is a tough. So
yeah,
that's why we have these organizations, to be able to evolve and not lose our identities.
And that's why it's also important that we have those really active and strong state societies, but at the same time working as a whole on a national level, so that we come with a unified voice and not one that's disparate.
I agree. And another interesting thing about the relationship between NSPS and the state boards is, state boards are created to protect the public. They're not made to help land surveyors, but there are land surveyors on the board, and you want a board that protects the public in terms of good quality surveys, but you also, on the other end, don't want a board that's a bully. And there are some states that are, they throw around their weight like a gorilla, trying to punish like property appraisal companies or other kinds of geospatial companies. And where is that fine line between protection versus inappropriate behavior?
Right, and the only way you're actually going to be able to address that is by having those professionals there. You can't just say, hey, all this technology is out there, everything's cool, and we're good to go on everything, without having that understanding and knowledge actually from those licensed members who understand the professions themselves and what they each mean and what they're supposed to be representing. And without that being part of the board, it seems like it would just be an impossibility to serve the purpose for why they were intended to begin with.
Absolutely. And, without land surveyors being on the board and using some common sense, it would just be administrators enforcing arbitrary rules, which doesn't sound like any fun. But that could be an entire discussion for a radio hour, would be
yeah,
what is the purpose of the board, and, what do they do now? Because being licensed in 8 different states, I realize that every state board has its own personality. They're sweet and they're friendly because a nice girl runs it and she's super sweet and friendly. And there's others who just, it's like, I don't even like getting your tooth extracted if you want to get some basic help. So it's interesting how a organization takes on the personality of the people who run it.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
But we've only got a few minutes left, so can you tell us about, what NSPS is doing right now? What kind of cool stuff do you have going on?
Well, one of the big things we're working on now is the international conference we're going to be hosting in 2023 in Florida. We had hoped to host the 2022 FIG International meeting because they operate sort of like our federal government does. They change presidents every 4 years. And so, well, we don't change, but we elect we elect a president every 4 years. And so they have a conference, an international conference every year, but on the years when they're not transitioning officers, it's called a working week. And so the number of people who show up for those is less than when they do the changeover. But they still bring a few thousand people. So we didn't get 2022. They decided to go to South Africa, where they currently don't have any water, but we'll see how that works out. But we did get Florida, so we're going to be in Orlando in 2023, it'll be a great meeting, and all the agencies that we've been talking about, the federal agencies, are going to be there helping us, and there'll still be a lot of conversation about 2022. So
Tony,
we're really excited about it. I think
Tony,
it's a
I'm
big
going to
deal.
have to interrupt, and we're out of time. We didn't sync our watches or something, but I want to thank you for taking over the realms of the Land Surveyors Hour. And Kurt, good hearing your voice again, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with more Land Surveyors Hours. Again, Tony, thank you.
Thank you.
Quick Stakes is your answer to staking. Lightweight, easy to ride on, easy to use, easy to find, and won't break your back carrying them like the old-fashioned wooden.
Veterans determined, starting back with Panama and the Gulf War, late 89 and in 91 with the Gulf War, we would not let our service people coming back be treated like we were. So the Vietnam service men and women across this nation, almost not even as a concerted planned effort, but as a conscious effort to make sure that the current serving men and women are given their due respect. And so my son, he will tell anybody that the gratitude and expression they get is due directly to what the Vietnam veterans has done for them and continue.
And welcome. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we got music again. I love it. I can never hear too much of this music. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another jam-packed show. There's just so much to discuss today. I basically don't even know where to start. But once again, this weekend did not lack in news stories. The lamestream media. I'm going to say a couple of things today, folks. I'm going to go ahead and prepare you, because those of you who routinely listen to the show here and routinely hear me talk, you're going to understand where I'm coming from. Those of you who may be new listeners, or those of you who are tuning in from the left of the dial, so to speak. And when I say left of the dial, folks, I don't mean that you're a traditional Democrat. And I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about traditional liberals in respect to some common social issues. When I mention the hard left or today's left, I'm talking about today's Socialist Democrat Party, today's Hippocrat Party. I mean, that's basically what we're looking at today when you talk about Democrats. But I say this because there are going to be some people listening that are going to react to some of the things I'm going to say today, and they're going to call me all kinds of names, which they do anyway, which is, I'm fine with that. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. Look, when you grow up going through high school and college, every bit of 5'3", and that's if I'm wearing the right shoes, you toughen up a bit, and so I can take it. I can take some name calling. In fact, I always know when I win an argument with a liberal, as soon as they start calling me names, then I know the argument has been won. So anyway, all right, folks, enough of that. As always, welcome to the show. This is On Point with Victor. I am Victor Armendariz. You guys can say it with me. I have people here in the studio that have been rolling their R's ever since I started that. But thanks again for listening. This is America's Web Radio. As always, check us out, americaswebradio.com. My show, believe it or not, is not the only show here. We have lots and lots of good shows. Check out americaswebradio.com. Everything from my show, On Point with Victor, where we'll discuss today's topics. And then there are shows all the way to a classic car show, which is an incredible show that's actually reached audiences across the pond. There's David's Pick show, which you never know what David's going to talk about, so you should definitely tune into that. There's Locked and Loaded with Roger B. Anything and everything you ever wanted to know about guns, be sure to tune in, and his show follows mine. So you're tuned in today, 2 to 3, listening to On Point with Victor. You hang in there at 3 o'clock, and you'll listen to Locked and Loaded with Roger B. In fact, I have a little bit of heads-up news. He's going to have a special guest today. So you're going to want to, you're going to just got the station manager here and owner is looking at me like, what? But lots to be heard, folks. So americaswebradio.com, that is the website. You want to email me, Victor at americaswebradio.com, Victor at americaswebradio.com. Send me your questions, send me your comments. You can do pretty much anything, especially if you disagree. Just don't call me names. I mean, you can, but I'm not going to answer you. I'm happy to have a lively debate with anyone. Heck, if you're a liberal out there and you have a good point, or you have a good argument, or you want to make a case, I'll even bring you onto the show. So if you're out there and you're part of the Democrat Party, if you're part of any Democrat Party out there and you want to have a debate with me on air, let's do it. Let's have a discussion. We won't even have to call it a debate. We can call it a discussion. Just be nice. That's all I ask. Be nice. Let me deviate here. I'll tell a quick story. The other night, I was on my motorcycle with a friend of mine, and we rode up to local Mellow Mushroom to watch a soccer game. We wanted to watch Atlanta United. We're big Atlanta United fans. And I ride up to the parking lot. Parking lot's full because apparently college football started. I did not know this because I don't follow football that very closely, college or pro. But I am a soccer fan, so we went there to go see soccer. So we ride up, and the parking lot's full. And I'm riding, and again, mind you, I'm on my motorcycle, and my buddy's with me. He's on a motorcycle as well. So we can pretty much park anywhere we want. But we're riding around, and we're looking for a spot, and then somebody jumped in the car, and they're about to leave. So I stop, I brake, I back up, and we're waiting for this person to back out. Well, a car zooms up behind us, and he pulls up next to him, and he starts screaming at me, yelling, that's my spot, that's my spot. I was sitting here, and I went, you're sitting behind me. I said, you can be first after me for the next spot that opens. But this guy was losing his mind, and I just started yelling and raising his voice and everything to me, and I looked at him and I said, look, I'm going to tell you something here. I'm on a motorcycle, so I can go park on the sidewalk, which is where I was going to head next until that spot started to open. And I looked at him, I said, why don't you try being nice? Why don't you try rolling down the window and saying, hey, I've got some people to meet. I've got a hot date waiting for me inside. I got a car. You've got a bike. Is there any way you can let me take this spot? And, man, maybe you can go park on the sidewalk or whatever. I'll even talk to the manager of the restaurant to make sure they'll allow you to park there. Nicety. Just be nice. And this guy, I will give him credit because I let him have the space, and I went and parked somewhere else. And he got out of his car, and he went over, and he saw me parking, and he waited for me. And he came over, and he apologized. And he said, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have assumed, and I shouldn't have been mean. I shouldn't have been nasty. I shouldn't have raised my voice. And he actually apologized. So I will give him credit for that. So that's just a quick story about being nice. So
But you didn't even say you recognized me.
Oh, well, this is true. I wasn't going to divulge your name. Folks, that was David, the owner of the station here. No, but my point there is when you are on the other side, and that's if you're on the right, if you're on the left, you're at the middle, no matter what, and you come across somebody who has a different point of view than yours, engage them in a conversation, but you don't have to be mean. You don't have to call names. Look, politics should never get between you and family or you and friends or anything like that. You should be able to have a discussion. That's what's beautiful about this country, is you have the right to believe what you want to believe. And if you engage in discussion, you're making the decision to engage in discussion. So if you do that, do it with niceties, and you might be surprised. You might actually, if your goal, which most people's goal when they get into political speak, is they want to bring someone to their side. They want to persuade. Well, if you're going to engage in the art of persuasion, you're not going to do it with name-calling. You're not going to do it with threatening acts. You're not going to do it with raising your voice. So just keep that in mind, and I'm bringing that all up because I highly encourage anyone on the left, anyone who believes in socialism, communism, whatever you believe in, if you want to come in and sit down with me, you're more than welcome to. If you want to email me, you're more than welcome to. If you want to interact with me live on the Facebook right now, on America's Web Radio's Facebook page, you can watch and interact with me live right now. Do it. Just do it with a little bit of niceties. You never know. We may agree more than you think we'll agree, And if we don't agree, that's fine too. So, all right, on with the show. I've bored you guys enough with my crazy stories. As I mentioned, there's so much to talk about. I don't even know where to begin. But one of the things I want to bring up is there's a storm brewing, and I'm not talking about Hurricane Dorian, and I'll get to that in a few. But there's a media storm developing right now, and it's about hit a Cat 3, Cat 4, with the narrative that the media is trying to set up with in terms of General Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis. The media is trying to get you to believe that Mad Dog absolutely hated Trump, that he couldn't stand working with Trump, and that he just is waiting and chomping at the bit to badmouth Trump. That's what the media wants you to believe right now, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Look, were there differences between General Madison and Trump? Absolutely there were. Were there drifts between them? Yeah, absolutely. Were there arguments or discussions? Yeah, I'm sure there were. But Mad Dog Madison, General Madison, is not going to go on the leftist, what can I say, lamestream media tour bad-mouthing Donald J. Trump. Madison's not going to do it. General Madison didn't become a general because he's an ideologue. He didn't become a general because he was thin-skinned. General Mad Dog Madison is revered and loved by many because of his tough stances that he takes. And he's not going to go around. This guy is military. This guy is the greatest generation military. He's from that era. And I can tell you right now, Madison is not going to go and give CNN what they want. He's not going to give MSNBC, ABC, NBC, any of that. He's not going to give them what they want, because the only reason they want to bring him on is because they're hoping and praying that he's going to badmouth President Trump. He's not going to do it. I venture to tell you that Madison is just going to say, I had a job to do. I went in and did it. It was an honor to be chosen by the President of the United States to do it. And that's probably what he's going to say. He'll probably say that he had some differences. Maybe they had everybody has policy difference, folks. Everybody does. I don't care if you come from the same party. There's going to be policy difference. There's going to be a way that you may want to approach it that's going to be different from someone else. And that's what happens. And I think that's what you're going to see Mattis. I mean, we're already seeing General Mattis in front of some of the media types that are just besides themselves because he won't badmouth President Trump. He won't say President Trump is not capable of being the president. In fact, I can't remember which outlet it was, but he's already been asked, and they tried to lead General Mattis into saying that Donald Trump was not qualified to be president. And Mattis, in the beautiful General Mattis, and only the way he can do it, he responded with something like, look, the American people elected President Trump. Of course he's qualified to be president. And then he went on to talk about how he was honored to serve. And yes, they had some policy differences, but he had a job to do, and he went there to do it. And Mattis even said everybody should be that way. If you have a job to do, you go do that job. And so that's just something, because that storm is brewing right now, and you've got the media creating this narrative and trying to do everything they can to get Mattis. I wanted you guys to be aware of that. If you are watching different news outlets, just pay attention to how they're trying to get General Mattis to fall into their narrative, because the media's already set the narrative that they want to set before General Mattis even gets on the shows. They're just hoping that he will give fodder to their narrative so they can run with that narrative and say, see, look, we knew Donald Trump was crazy. That's what they want to do. But rest assured, I don't think General Mattis is going to give them that kind of fodder. He's just not going to do it. The man is whether you disagree with him or not, or agree with him or not, General Mattis is a pretty sharp guy. All right, so we have so much on the topic rundowns to get to today. I have to mention the hurricane. So this is where I'm going to get into probably saying a couple of things that a few people are probably look. There are going to be some people on the left who are going to who knows what they're going to call me, but that's okay. But you don't have to take this from me, as I tell you guys all the time, you awesome listeners out there. Listen to what I say and enjoy my show. because I couldn't be here if it weren't for you guys. But look things up for yourself. So what I'm about to tell you, look it up for yourself, because you can go, maybe not yet to YouTube, but you can do some research and or just start watching some of the news coverage. But if you look back at the news coverage coming in when this hurricane started forming, it was doom and gloom, doom and gloom, doom and gloom. Now, I understand some of this is because of ratings. Look, we haven't had a major hurricane hit the United States for quite a while now, so viewership at weather.com or whatever the big one is it's been falling, and so they're going to do everything to get those ratings back up. So hang on right there. You know what? Let's go ahead and take the break. And when we come back from this break, I'm going to get into to some of the reporting that was done on the hurricane, and I'll give you an update on the hurricane. So you stay tuned. You'll be right back. You're listening to On Point with Victor, America's Web Radio.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm here to tell you that the folks I used and now recommend is Around Town Movers. Timothy and the guys recently moved me, and I am and was totally satisfied with a sometimes not so fun experience moving. Call Timothy at 770-378-4708 and make it a good move and a good experience. Around Town Movers for that local or cross-country move. Timothy, Around Town Movers, in my opinion, are the best. That's Around Town Movers. Call them.
This is Dr. Susan Blank, Medical Director for the Atlanta Healing Center. Our team is able to offer a multitude of treatment options such as quantitative EEG, also known as brain mapping, hormonal and nutritional assessments, neuropsychological testing, and cognitive therapy, along with traditional 12-step facilitation. And we can even offer you, if appropriate, a gentle medically managed detox. Please contact us at 770-696-9862.
Okay, folks, and we're back on America's Web Radio and On Point with Victor Armendariz.
That's good.
Hey, I've been practicing, you know. Some people sing in the shower. I just do my... Never mind. I just want to remind everybody that very shortly we'll be coming out with a new blog on our Facebook page, or on our web page, and you might want to check it out. It's got... We want to hear from you, and everybody has a pet peeve, or more than one pet peeve.
Probably more than one.
And I listed many of my pet peeves, and if you've got one that's not listed there, we'd like to hear from you, and list it, and we'll talk about it. And there are all sorts of pet peeves and whatever's that are going around, and hey, this is interesting. Why is this?
Well, you know, it's live radio. So.
It's live radio, yeah. And the other thing, folks, is that if you have, we think we're on we know we're on the major ones, but every podcast server, we feel like we're on that sucker. But if for some reason you can't find us on the podcast server that you use, please email GM at America's Web Radio, General Manager, GM and he will take care of making sure that Brett gets us on that podcast server, because we want to be on every one of them. We are acknowledged now as being one of, if not the largest producing podcast radio stations in the country, and it's due to the fact that we've got fantastic hosts like Victor and like Roger and like Susan Blank coming in here, and I don't know for sure what Roger's going to be talking about, well, other than guns, but guns and more guns. And Susan Blank, our resident psychiatrist, will be talking about, there was another death due to vaping, and I think she's going to follow through on, she did a show on it the other day, and I think she's going to be following through with another show on vaping. It is of epidemic proportion and getting worse, and we're gonna try to help do something about it. So with that being said, let's do this. Where is that sucker? I can't find that. I was gonna.
It's live radio.
It's live radio, and I think I'm dead. So, what can I say?
Well, that's just the way it goes.
Dead and buried and doesn't know it. But anyway, where we go? Well, we'll just do it again.
And we're officially back now, ladies and gentlemen, to the On Point with Victor show. So, look, we have fun here, guys. If you ever get a chance, you should really watch in the studio. Not to see my crazy, ugly mug, but when you see my facial expressions, it's usually because the behind-the-scenes studio guys here are making me laugh, and we just have a good time here, and love bringing you the news, and love bringing you common sense and logic. The common sense and logic analysis that I bring, that's what On Point with Victor is all about. You can get bogged down in these crazy narratives, and the media's fighting each other for ratings. And not really get a good analysis of the day's events and the things that are going on. And that's what I like to do here at On Point with Victor, is bring you a common sense and logic analysis of what's going on. And that's why I do my topic rundown. The topic rundown is it's what we're getting known for here. And let's see, we've already hit 2 today. Well, I started on the second one, so let me get back to that. So Hurricane Dorian, look, folks, we haven't dodged the bullet, but we definitely dodged the blast, at least most of Florida. What I was alluding to before we went to the break was if you look and just do some research and look at the narrative that the media was putting out. Folks, the media on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, and you name it, the lamestream media, they were all hoping that they were going to be able to report the destruction of Mar-a-Lago today. Folks, there is a problem in this country right now, and it begins with the lamestream media, and that some people refer to as the mainstream media. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have the free press out there, and by God, it should be free press, and we better keep it the free press, and that's what the First Amendment is all about, which, to my amazement, the left is constantly attacking the First Amendment, constantly attacking the freedom of religion, constantly attacking the freedom of speech. But that's a whole nother show. But for this purpose, if you listen to these so-called journalists and the so-called members of the free press who were actively talking over the weekend about this hurricane hitting Mar-a-Lago, they weren't just saying the possible. They were bringing up Mar-a-Lago time after time after time, that it's a Trump property and the hurricane's making it. I mean, they wanted this place destroyed. Now, think about it, folks. Just because the mainstream or lamestream media has such a problem with President Trump, and just because they want to get rid of him so bad, they're willing to almost call for the destruction of one of his properties or several of his properties without even stopping to think. Now look, this is coming from the left. This is coming from the so-called caring Democrats, the so-called we feel your pain Democrats. If Mar-a-Lago had been destroyed, do you know how many other houses would have been destroyed? Do you know how many homes around that area would have been destroyed? Many of them occupied and owned by the elite leftist Democrats themselves. So you have these media journalists and some of these members in the press and Democrat Party who would have loved to have been able to see Mar-a-Lago destroyed and be underwater today, thinking that that would have been points for them against Trump. And then they could have come out with a narrative. They would have come out saying, God takes revenge on Trump. I mean, look, they're not beneath this. This is what they would do. And it's despicable. But they don't even consider the innocent lives and people that would have been possibly killed or lost their homes just by calling or just by hoping that Mar-a-Lago, that area, would have been hit by this storm. I mean, it's pretty sad that we've got a media that does that. But on the bright side, and to the dismay of some of these journalists, Hurricane Dorian has, not only has it been weakening, it is now, the last time I checked, it is a Cat 2. And I would check now, but my laptop decided to die. So I can't check right now. But the last time I checked about an hour ago, Dorian was down, weakened to a Cat 2. Now look, Cat 2 is still a pretty dangerous storm. And the other good news is this storm is making the turn. It's staying off the coast of Florida. Now that's not to say, now remember I said we dodged we dodged the storm. Let me rephrase. We dodged the blast, but not the bullet. Because some of these outer bands are still going to hit Florida. They're still going to hit Georgia. And North Carolina looks like they may get the worst of this storm. So those people, if you're in that area, you need to take heed and you need to be ready for this storm. Just because it's weakening and just because it's staying offshore doesn't mean it's not going to cause damage. The reason I bring up the good news that it is losing steam and that it is staying offshore is because it's not going to do nearly the damage that it could have done and was going to do to Florida. I mean, folks, if this thing had a hit as a Cat 5 and slammed into Florida or or Georgia or the Carolinas, it was going to be bad. It was going to be bad news. We haven't even seen pictures come out of Bahamas yet, Freeport, Bahamas. This storm not only slammed into them, it decided to stop and take a break on top of them. They had to endure 165, 185 mile an hour plus winds. And if you know the Bahamas, not exactly known for their well-built homes and buildings and things of that sort. So it's going to be a bad situation there. And I know the United States will be the first to offer aid, and I hope that other countries in the region come to the aid of the Bahamas because they're going to need it. But the good news is this storm has weakened, and it is staying offshore. So Florida, it looks like you're going to be spared, but still you're going to get some rain. You're going to get some storm surge, so be on the lookout for that. And Carolinas, you guys pay attention because this storm, depending on what it does when it passes Florida and Georgia, it could still make landfall in the Carolinas. So let's all be wary of that. So, all right, so that's, and again, you can look up some of these media stories. I mean, because it's absolutely insane. And the sad thing is you've got Democrats, you've got candidates on the Democrat side who already had their narratives and were already trying to blame Donald Trump for this storm. Now, let me give you a quick lesson here. The problem with what the media does is they outright lie to you. And the problem with some of these Democrats is they outright will lie to you. And either they're outright lying to you or they just don't know. And they don't take the time to look at the history, and they just repeat and regurgitate what the leftist media is telling them. And then you've got some establishment Republicans that will buy into this mess. And there is nothing more. The only thing that ticks me off more than a socialist Democrat and some of these candidates is when the establishment Republicans join hand and start running with this ridiculous narrative and wrong narrative that will get put out there. One of the things you're going to hear, and mark my words, you're going to hear this because they've already started. But you're going to hear them, the weather.com, you're going to hear CNN, MSNBC, all these guys are going to come out and say, these are the worst storms we've had in 4 years. We've had the most Cat 5s in 4 years, and this, that, and the strongest this, the strongest that, the warmest waters, blah, 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 blah. Look, you can look up and do some research on the history of hurricanes and the history of the hurricanes that have hit Florida. And ladies and gentlemen, the last seven, not the last seven, but these seven similar hurricanes that were very strong and hit very similar temperature waters all happened before the 1950s. Let me repeat that, before the 1950s. So I venture to say that in the 1950s and before the 1950s, we didn't have a lot of people running around accusing you of killing the planet because you were driving a car or flying on an airplane. So this is what I mean by people not paying attention or learning history, or if you are an elected official or you're part of the media or a journalist, or if you are a candidate seeking the highest office in the land, which would be the President of the United States, if you're any of those people and you don't take the time to verify a narrative that you're hearing, then you ought to be ashamed of yourself, because it's your duty to tell the truth to the American people. All right, folks, time is flying by. We got the bottom of the hour break here. You stay tuned. We will be right back. This is On Point with Victor, America's Web Radio.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
45 years of experience is behind the most trusted name in auto transportation. Passport Transport, the first and finest today. That's why Passport Transport is the preferred auto transport for major auto manufacturers, concours, museums,